Audio Renaissance presents The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan. Read for you by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding.
The shadow shall rise across the world and darken every land, even to the smallest corner, and there shall be neither light nor safety. And he who shall be born of the dawn, born of the maiden, according to prophecy, he shall stretch forth his hands to catch the shadow, and the world shall scream in the pain of salvation. All glory be to the Creator, and to the light, and to he who shall be born again. May the light save us from him. From Commentaries on the Kareathon Cycle, Serain Dar Shamel Motara, council sister to Comail, High Queen of Jaramide, circa 325 AD, the Third Age. Chapter 1. Seeds of Shadow. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose on the great plain called the Carolane Grass. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning. North and west the wind blew beneath early morning sun, over endless miles of rolling grass and far scattered thickets, across the swift-flowing river Luan, past the broken-topped fang of Dragon Mount, mountain of legend towering above the slow swells of the rolling plain, looming so
Hey,
high that
Christopher, how you
clouds
doing?
reached it less than halfway to the smoking peak.
Hope you're doing
Dragon
well.
Mount, where the dragon had died, and with him, some said, the age of legends, where prophecy said he would be born again, or had been. North and west, across the villages of Juwalda and Darain and Alendair, where bridges like stone lacework arched out to the shining walls, the great white walls of what many called the greatest city in the world, Tar Valon, a city just touched by the reaching shadow of Dragon Mount each evening. Within those walls, Ogier-made buildings well over 2,000 years old seemed to grow out of the ground rather than having been built, or to be the work of wind and water rather than that of even the
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
fabled hands of Ogier's stonemasons. Some suggested birds taking flight, or huge shells from distant seas. Soaring towers, flared or fluted or spiraled, stood connected by bridges hundreds of feet in the air, often without rails. Only those long in Tar Valon could avoid gaping like country folk who had never been off the farm. Greatest of those towers, the White Tower dominated the city, gleaming like polished bone in the sun. The wheel of time turns around Tar Valon, so people say the city, and Tar Valon turns around the tower. The first sight travelers had of Tar Valon before their horses came in view of the bridges, before their riverboat captains sighted the island, was the tower reflecting the sun like a beacon. Small wonder, then, that the great square surrounding the walled tower ground seemed smaller than it was under the massive tower's gaze, the people in it dwindling to insects. Yet the White Tower could have been the smallest in Tar Valon. The fact that it was the heart of Aes Sedai power would still have overawed the island city. Despite their numbers, the crowd did not come close to filling the square. Along the edges, people jostled each other in a milling mass, all going about their day's business, but closer to the tower grounds there were ever fewer people, until a band of bare paving stones, at least 50 paces wide, bordered the tall white walls. Aes Sedai were respected and more in Tar Valon, of course, and the Amerlin seat ruled the city as she ruled the Aes Sedai, but few wanted to be closer to Aes Sedai power than they had to. There was a difference between being proud of a grand fireplace in your hall and walking into the flames. A very few did go closer, to the broad stairs that led up to the tower itself, to the intricately carved doors wide enough for a dozen people abreast. Those doors stood open, welcoming. There were always some people in need of aid or an answer they thought only Aes Sedai could give, and they came from far as often as near, from Arafel and Gildan, from Saldaea and Ilion. Many would find help or guidance inside, though often not what they had expected or hoped for. Min kept the wide hood of her cloak pulled up, shadowing her face in its depths. In spite of the warmth of the day, the garment was light enough not to attract comment, not on a woman so obviously shy. And a good many people were shy when they went to the tower. There was nothing about her to attract notice. Her dark hair was longer than when she was last in the tower, though still not quite to her shoulders, and her dress, plain blue except for narrow bands of white Jericho's lace at neck and wrists, would have suited the daughter of a well-to-do farmer, wearing her feast day best to the tower just like the other women approaching the wide stairs. Min hoped she looked the same, at least. She had to stop herself from staring at them to see if they walked or held themselves differently. I can do it, she told herself. She had certainly not come all this way to turn back now. The dress was a good disguise. Those who remembered her in the tower remembered a young woman with close-cropped hair, always in a boy's coat and breeches, never in a dress. It had to be a good disguise. She had no choice about what she was doing, not really. Her stomach fluttered the closer she came to the tower, and she tightened her grip on the bundle clutched to her breast. Her usual clothes were in there, and her good boots, and all her possessions except the horse she had left at an inn not far from the square. With luck, she would be back on the gelding in a few hours, riding for the Austrane Bridge and the road south. She was not really looking forward to climbing onto a horse again so soon, not after weeks in the saddle with never a day's pause, but she longed to leave this place. She had never seen the White Tower as hospitable, and right now it seemed nearly as awful as the Dark One's prison at Sheol Ghul. Shivering, she wished she had not thought of the Dark One. I wonder if Moiraine thinks I came just because she asked me. The light helped me, acting like a fool girl, doing fool things because of a fool man. She mounted the stairs uneasily. Each was deep enough to take 2 strides for her to reach the next, and unlike most of the others, she did not pause for an awed stare up the pale height of the tower. She wanted this over. Inside, archways almost surrounded the large, round entry hall, but the petitioners huddled in the middle of the chamber, shuffling together beneath a flat-domed ceiling. The pale stone floor had been worn and polished by countless nervous feet over the centuries. No one thought of anything except where they were and why. A farmer and his wife in rough woolens, clutching each other's calloused hands, rubbed shoulders with a merchant in velvet-slashed silks, a maid at her heels clutching a small worked silver casket, no doubt her mistress's gift for the tower. Elsewhere, the merchant would have stared down her nose at farm folk who brushed so close, and they might well have knuckled their hands and backed away apologizing. Not now. Not here. There were few men among the petitioners, which was no surprise to Min. Most men were nervous around Aes Sedai. Everyone knew it had been male Aes Sedai when there still had been male Aes Sedai who were responsible for the breaking of the world. 3,000 years had not dimmed that memory, even if time had altered many of the details. Children were still frightened by tales of men who could channel the one power, men doomed to go mad from the Dark One's taint on Saidin, the male half of the true source. Worst was the story of Luz Theron Telamon, the dragon, Luz Theron Kinslayer, who had begun the breaking. For that matter, the stories frightened adults, too. Prophecy said the dragon would be born again in mankind's greatest hour of need, to fight the Dark One in Tarmon Gaiden, the last battle. But that made little difference in how most people looked at any connection between men and the power. Any Aes Sedai would hunt down a man who could channel now. Of the 7 Ajahs, the Red did little else. Of course, none of that had anything to do with seeking help from Aes Sedai, yet few men felt easy about being linked in any way to Aes Sedai and the power. Few, that is, except warders. But each warder was bonded to an Aes Sedai. Warders could hardly be taken for the general run of men. There was a saying, a man will cut off his own hand to get rid of a splinter before asking help from Aes Sedai. Women meant it as a comment on men's stubborn foolishness, but Min had heard some men say the loss of a hand might be the better decision. She wondered what these people would do if they knew what she knew. Run screaming, perhaps. And if they knew her reason for being here, she might not survive to be taken up by the tower guards and thrown into a cell. She did have friends in the tower, but none with power or influence. If her purpose was discovered, it was much less likely that they could help her than that she would pull them to the gallows or the headsman behind her. That was saying she lived to be tried, of course. More likely her mouth would be stopped permanently long before a trial. She told herself to stop thinking like that. I'll make it in, and I'll make it out. The light burn, Randall Thor, for getting me into this. 3 or 4 accepted, women Min's age or perhaps a little older, were circulating through the round room, speaking softly to the petitioners. Their white dresses had no decoration except for 7 bands of color at the hem, 1 band for each Ajah. Now and again a novice, a still younger woman or girl all in white, came to lead someone deeper into the tower. The petitioners always followed the novices with an odd mix of excited eagerness and foot-dragging reluctance. Min's grip tightened on her bundle as one of the accepted stopped in front of her. The light illumine you, the curly-haired woman said perfunctorily.
I hope everyone's having a good
I'm
evening.
called Phelan. How may the tower help you? Phelan's dark, round face held the patience of someone doing a tedious job when she would rather be doing something else. Studying, probably, from what Min knew of the accepted, learning to be Aes Sedai. Most important, however, was the lack of recognition in the accepted's eyes. The 2 of them had met when Min was in the tower before, though only briefly. Just the same, Min lowered her face in assumed diffidence. It was not unnatural. A good many country folk did not really understand the great step up from accepted to full Aes Sedai. Shielding her features behind the edge of her cloak, she looked away from Phelan. I have a question I must ask the Amerlin seat, she began, then cut off abruptly as 3 Aes Sedai stopped to look into the entry hall, 2 from one archway and 1 from another. Accepted and novices curtsied when their rounds took them close to one of the Aes Sedai, but otherwise went on about their tasks, perhaps a trifle more briskly. That was all. Not so for the petitioners. They seemed to catch their breaths altogether. Away from the White Tower, away from Tar Valon, they might simply have thought the Aes Sedai 3 women whose ages they could not guess, 3 women in the flush of their prime, yet with more maturity than their smooth cheeks suggested. In the tower, though, there was no question. A woman who had worked very long with the One Power was not touched by time in the same way as other women. In the tower, no one needed to see a golden great serpent ring to know an Aes Sedai. A ripple of curtsies spread through the huddle, and jerky bows from the few men. 2 or 3 people even fell to their knees. The rich merchant looked frightened. The farm couple at her side stared at legends come to life. How to deal with Aes Sedai was a matter of hearsay for most. It was unlikely that any here, except those who actually lived in Tar Valon, had seen an Aes Sedai before, and probably not even the Tar Valoners had been this close. But it was not the Aes Sedai themselves that halted Min's tongue. Sometimes, not often, she saw things when she looked at people, images and auras that usually flared and were gone in moments. Occasionally she knew what they meant. It happened rarely, the knowing, much more rarely than the seeing even, but when she knew, she was always right. Unlike most others, Aes Sedai and their warders always had images and auras, sometimes so many dancing and shifting that they made Min dizzy. The numbers made no difference in interpreting them, though. She knew what they meant for Aes Sedai as seldom as for anyone else. But this time she knew more than she wanted to, and it made her shiver. A slender woman with black hair falling to her waist, the only one of the 3 she recognized. Her name was Ananda. She was yellow Ajah, wore a sickly brown halo, shriveled and split by rotting fissures that fell in and widened as they decayed. The small, fair-haired Aes Sedai beside Ananda was green Ajah by her green-fringed shawl. The white flame of Tar Valon on it showed for a moment when she turned her back. and on her shoulder, as if nestled among the grapevines and flowering apple branches worked on her shawl, sat a human skull, a small woman's skull, picked clean and sun-bleached. The third, a plumply pretty woman halfway around the room, wore no shawl. Most Aes Sedai did not, except for ceremony. The lift of her chin and the set of her shoulders spoke of strength and pride. She seemed to be casting cool blue eyes on the petitioners through a tattered curtain of blood, crimson streamers running down her face. Blood and skull and halo faded away in the dance of images around the three, came and faded again. The petitioners stared in awe, seeing only three women who could touch the true source and channel the one power. No one but Min saw the rest. No one but Min knew those three women were going to die, all on the same day. The Amerlin cannot see everyone, Phaelane said with poorly hidden impatience. Her next public audience is not for 10 days. Tell me who you want, and I will arrange for you to see the sister who can best help you. Min's eye flew to the bundle in her arms and stayed there, partly so she would not have to see again what she had already seen. All three of them. Light. What chance was there that three Aes Sedai would die on the same day? But she knew. She knew. I have the right to speak to the Amerlin seat, in person. It was a right seldom demanded. Who would dare? But it existed. Any woman has that right, and I ask it. Do you think the Amerlin seat herself can see everyone who comes to the White Tower? Surely another Aes Sedai can help you. Phaelane gave heavy weight to the titles as if to overpower Min. Now tell me what your question is about, and give me your name so the novice will know who to come for. My name is Elmindreda. Min winced in spite of herself. She'd always hated the name, but the Amerlin was one of the few people living who had ever heard it. If only she remembered. I have the right to speak to the Amerlin, and my question is for her alone. I have the right. The accepted arched an arm. Elmindreda. Her mouth twitched toward an amused smile. And you claim your rights. Very well. I will send word to the Keeper of the Chronicles that you wish to see the Amerlin seat personally, Elmindreda. Min wanted to slap the woman for the way she emphasized Elmindreda, but instead she forced out a murmured, "Thank you." Do not thank me yet. No doubt it will be hours before the Keeper finds time to reply, and it will certainly be that you can ask your question at the mother's next public audience. Wait with patience, Elmindreda. She gave Min a tight smile, almost a smirk, as she turned away. Grinding her teeth, Min took her bundle to stand against the wall between two of the archways, where she tried to blend into the framework. Trust no one, and avoid notice until you reach the Amerlin, Moiraine had told her. Moiraine was one Aes Sedai she did trust. Most of the time. It was good advice in any case. All she had to do was reach the Amerlin, and it would be over. She could don her own clothes
some
again,
roaches
see her
right now.
and leave. No more need for hiding. She was relieved to see that the Aes Sedai had gone. 3 Aes Sedai dying on one day.
I got some
impossible.
some
That was
good
the
wax
only word.
though, so
Yet it was going to happen. Nothing she said or did could change it. When she knew what an image meant, it happened. But she had to tell the Amerlin about this. It might even be as important as the news she brought from Moiraine, though that was hard to believe. Another accepted came to replace one already there, and to Min's eyes, bars floated in front of her apple-cheeked face like a cage. Shiriam, the mistress of novices, looked into the hall. After one glance, Min kept her gaze on the stone under her feet. Shiriam knew her all too well, and the red-haired Aes Sedai's face seemed battered and bruised. It was only the viewing, of course, but Min still had to bite her lip to stifle a gasp. Shiriam, with her calm authority and sureness, was as indestructible as the tower. Surely nothing could harm Shiriam, but something was going to. An Aes Sedai unknown to Min, wearing the shawl of the brown Ajah, accompanied a stout woman in finely woven red wool to the doors. The stout woman walked as lightly as a girl,
sugar wax.
face shining, almost laughing with pleasure. The brown sister was smiling too, but her aura faded like a guttering candle flame. Death. Wounds, captivity, and death. To men, it might as well have been printed on a page. She set her eyes on her feet. She did not want to see any more. Let her remember, she thought. She had not felt desperation at any time on her long ride from the mountains of mist, not even on the 2 occasions when someone tried to steal her horse, but she felt it now. Light. Let her remember that bloody name. Mistress Elmindreda? Min gave a start. The black-haired novice who stood before her was barely old enough to be away from home, perhaps 15 or 16, though she made a great effort at dignity. Yes, I am. That is my name. I am Sarah. If you will come with me. Sarah's piping voice took on a note of wonder.
Ice cream cake,
the
sugar wax.
Seat will see you in her study now. Min gave a sigh of relief and followed eagerly.
That's pretty much what I got.
Her cloak's deep hood still hid
in
her
this
face,
half.
but it did not stop her seeing, and the more she saw, the more she grew eager to reach the Amerlin. Few people walked the broad corridors that spiraled upward with their brightly colored floor tiles and their wall hangings and golden lampstands. The tower had been built to hold far greater numbers than it did now, but nearly everyone she saw as she climbed higher wore an image or aura that spoke to her of violence and danger. Warders hurried by with barely a glance for the 2 women, men who moved like hunting wolves, their swords only an afterthought to their deadliness, but they seemed to have bloody faces or gaping wounds. Swords and spears danced about their heads, threatening.
Had to get a
Their
little
auras
brush
flashed wildly,
make sure I get that out of the cracks.
She saw dead men walking, knew they would die on the same day as the Aes Sedai in the entry hall, or at most a day later. Even some of the servants, men and women with the flame of Tar Valon on their breasts, hurrying about their work, bore signs of violence. An Aes Sedai glimpsed down a side hallway appeared to have chains in the air around her, and another, crossing the corridor ahead of Min and her guide, seemed for most of those few strides to wear a silver collar around her neck. Min's breath caught at that. She wanted to scream. It can all be overwhelming to someone who's never seen it before, Sarah said, trying and failing to sound as if the tower were as ordinary to her now as her home village. But you are safe here. The Amerlin's seat will make things right. Her voice squeaked when she mentioned the Amerlin. Light. Let her do just that, Min muttered. The novice gave her a smile that was meant to be soothing. By the time they reached the hall outside the Amerlin's study, Min's stomach was churning and she was treading almost on Sarah's heels. Only the need to pretend that she was a stranger had kept her from running ahead long since. One of the doors to the Amerlin's chambers opened, and a young man with red gold hair came stalking out, nearly striding up to Min and her escort. Tall and straight and strong in his blue coat thickly embroidered with gold on sleeves and collar, Gawain of House Trakand, eldest son of Queen Morgaze of Andor, looked every inch the proud young lord, a furious young lord. There was no time to drop her head. He was staring down into her hood, right into her face. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed to slits of blue ice. So you are back. Do you know where my sister and Egwene have gone? They're not here? Min forgot everything in a rising flood of panic. Before she knew what she was doing, she had seized his sleeves, peering up at him urgently, and forced him back a step. Gawain, they started for the tower months ago. Elaine and Egwene and Nynaeve, too, with Varen Sedai, and Gawain, I... Calm yourself, he said, gently undoing her grip on his coat. Light, I didn't mean to frighten you so. They arrived safely, and would not say a word of where they had been or why. Not to me. I suppose there's scant hope you will? She thought she kept her face straight, but he took one look and said, I thought not. This place has more secrets than... They've vanished again. And Nynaeve, too. Nynaeve was almost an offhand addition. She might be one of Min's friends, but she meant nothing to him. His voice began to roughen once more, growing tighter by the second. Again without a word. Not a word. Supposedly they're on a farm somewhere as penance for running away, but I cannot find out where. The Ammerlin won't give me a straight answer. Min flinched. For a moment, streaks of dried blood had made his face a grim mask. It was like a double hammer blow. Her friends were gone. It had eased her coming to the tower, knowing they were here. And Gawain was going to be wounded on the day the Aes Sedai died. Despite all she had seen since entering the tower, despite her fear, none of it had really touched her personally until now. Disaster striking the tower would spread far from Helvalen, yet she was not of the tower and never could be. But Gawain was someone she knew, someone she liked, and he was going to be hurt more than the blood told, hurt somehow deeper than wounds to his flesh. It hit her that if catastrophe seized the tower, not only distant Aes Sedai would be harmed, women she could never feel close to, but her friends as well. They were of the tower. In a way, she was glad Egwene and the others were not there, glad she could not look at them and perhaps see signs of death. Yet she wanted to look, to be sure, to look at her friends and see nothing, or see that they would live. Where in life were they? Where had they gone? Knowing those three, she thought it possible that if Gawain did not know where they were, it was because they did not want him to know. It could be that. Suddenly she remembered where she was and why, and that she was not alone with Gawain. Sara seemed to have forgotten she was taking Min to the Ammerlin. She seemed to have forgotten everything but the young lord, making calf eyes that he was not noticing. Even so, there was no use pretending any longer to be a stranger to the tower. She was at the Ammerlin's door. Nothing could stop her now. Gawain, I don't know where they are, but if they are doing penance on a farm, they're probably all sweat and mud to their hips, and you are the last one they will want to see them. She was not much easier about their absence than Gawain was, in truth. Too much had happened, too much was happening, too much with ties to them and to her. But it was not impossible they had been sent off for punishment. You won't help them by making the Ammerlin angry. I don't know that they are on a farm, or even alive. Why all this hiding and sidestepping if they're just pulling weeds? If anything happens to my sister, or to Egwene, he frowned at the toes of his boots. I'm supposed to look after Elaine. How can I protect her when I don't know where she is? Min sighed. You think she needs looking after? Either of them? But if the Ammerlin had sent them somewhere, maybe they did. The Ammerlin was capable of sending a woman into a bear's den with nothing but a switch if it suited her purposes, and she would expect the woman to come back with a bearskin, or the bear on a leash, as instructed. But telling Gawain that would only inflame his temper and his worries. Gawain, they have pledged to the tower. They won't thank you for meddling. I know Elaine isn't a child, he said patiently. Even if she does bounce back and forth between running off like one and playing at being Aes Sedai. But she is my sister, and beyond that, she is daughter heir of Andor. She'll be queen after mother. Andor needs her whole and safe to take the throne, not another succession. Playing at being Aes Sedai? Apparently he did not realize the extent of his sister's talent. The daughter heirs of Andor had been sent to the tower to train for as long as there had been an Andor, but Elaine was the first to have enough talent to be raised to Aes Sedai, and a powerful Aes Sedai at that. Very likely he also did not know Egwene was just as strong. So you will protect her whether she wants it or not. She said it in a flat voice meant to let him know he was making a mistake, but he missed the warning and nodded agreement. That has been my duty since the day she was born. My blood shed before hers. My life given before hers. I took that oath when I could barely see over the side of her cradle. Gareth Bryne had to explain to me what it meant. I won't break it now. Andor needs her more than it needs me. He spoke with a calm certainty, an acceptance of something natural and right that sent chills through her. She'd always thought of him as boyish, laughing and teasing, but now he was something alien. She thought the Creator must have been tired when it came time to make men. Sometimes they hardly seemed human. And Egwene? What oath did you take about her? His face did not change, but he shifted his feet warily. I'm concerned about Egwene, of course, and Nynaeve. What happens to Elaine's companions might happen to Elaine. I assume they're still together. When they were here, I seldom saw one without the others. My mother always told me to marry a poor liar, and you qualify, except that I think someone else has first claim. Some things are meant to be.
Hey, D-Man, how you doing?
And some never can.
Yeah, I'm doing one that's like that too, and it's going.
Because Egwene is gone.
It's going a lot quicker than
Galad
the last one went.
The pair of them sent to Tar Valon to train under the warden. That was another Andorian.
I saw that you were doing a new one. Did you finish that other one already?
Was a man who took doing the right thing to the point of a fault, as men saw it. But Gawain could see no wrong in him, and he would not speak his feelings for a woman Galad had set his heart on. She wanted to shake him, shake some sense into him, but there was no time now. Not with the Amyrlin waiting, not with what she had to tell the Amyrlin waiting. Certainly not with Sara standing there, calf eyes or no calf eyes. Gawain, I am summoned to the Amyrlin. Where can I find you when she is done with me? I will be in the practice yard. The only time I can stop worrying is when I am working the sword with Hamar. Hamar was
the other one
master,
took me a little bit there, over a month.
Most days I'm there until the sunset.
Which sucked.
Good then.
But
I will come as soon as I can.
The new one I'm starting,
or
I started,
if you make the Amyrlin
it's
angry
actually
with you,
going
Elaine and Egwene might
a
share.
lot quicker.
That I cannot promise, he said firmly. Something is wrong in the world. Civil war in Cairhien, the same and worse in Tarabon and Aradoman. False dragons, troubles and rumors of troubles everywhere.
I saw that.
I don't say the tower is behind it, but even here things are not what they should be, or what they seem. Elaine and Egwene vanishing isn't the whole of it. Still, they are the part that concerns me. I will find out where they are, and if they have been hurt, if they are dead. He scowled, and for an instant his face was that bloody mask again. More. A sword floated above his head, and a banner waved behind it. The long-hilted sword, like those most warders used, had a heron engraved on its slightly curved blade, symbol of a blade master, and men could not say whether it belonged to Gawain or threatened him. The banner bore Gawain's sigil of the charging white boar, but on a field of green rather than the red of Andor. Both sword and banner faded with the blood. Be careful, Gawain. She meant it two ways. Careful of what he said, and careful in a way she could not explain even to herself. You must be very careful. His eyes searched her face, as if he had heard some of her deeper meaning. I will try, he said finally. He put on a grin, almost the grin she remembered, but the effort was plain. I suppose I had better get myself back to the practice yard if I expect to keep up with Galad. I managed 2 out of 5 against Hamar this morning, but Galad actually won 3, the last time he bothered to come to the yard. Suddenly he appeared to really see her for the first time, and his grin became genuine. You ought to wear dresses more often. It's pretty on you. Remember, I will be there till sunset. As he strode away with something very close to the dangerous grace of a warder, Min realized she was smoothing the dress over her hip, and stopped immediately. The light burn all men. Sara exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. He is very good-looking, isn't he? She said dreamily. Not as good-looking as Lord Galad, of course. And you really know him? It was half a question.
Let me go check it out on my tablet real quick.
Min echoed the novice's sigh. The girl would talk with her friends in the novice's quarters. The son of a queen was a natural topic, especially when he was handsome and had an air about him like the hero in a gleeman's tale. A strange woman only made for more interesting speculation. Still, there was nothing to be done about it. At any rate, it could hardly cause any harm now. The Amyrlin seat must be wondering why we haven't come, she said. Sara came to herself with a wide-eyed start and a loud gulp. Seizing Min's sleeve with one hand, she jumped to open one of the doors, pulling Min behind her. The moment they were inside, the novice
I don't have the volume up, but I'm watching it.
Panic. I've brought her, Lyanna Sedai. Mistress Elmindreda, the Amerlin's seat wants to see her. The tall, coppery-skinned woman in the anteroom wore the hand-wide stole of the Keeper of the Chronicles, blue, to show she had been raised from the Blue Aja. Fists on hips, she waited for the girl to finish, then dismissed her with a clipped, "Took you long enough, child. Back to your chores now." Sarah bobbed another curtsy and scurried out as quickly as she had entered. Min stood with her eyes on the floor, her hood still pulled up around her face. Blundering in front of Sarah had been bad enough, though at least the novice did not know her name. But Liana knew her better than anyone in the tower except the Amerlin. Min was sure it could make no difference now, but after what had happened in the hallway, she meant to hold to Moiraine's instructions until she was alone with the Amerlin. This time her precautions did no good. Liana took 2 steps, pushed back the hood, and grunted as if she had been poked in the stomach. Min raised her head and stared back defiantly, trying to pretend she had not been attempting to sneak past. Straight dark hair, only a little longer than her own, framed the keeper's face. The Aes Sedai's expression was a blend of surprise and displeasure at being surprised. "So you are Elmindreda, are you?" Liana said briskly. She was always brisk. "I must say you look it, more in that dress than in your usual garb." "Just Min, Liana Sedai, if you please." Min managed to keep her face straight, but it was difficult not to glare. The keeper's voice had held too much amusement. If her mother had had to name her after someone in a story, why did it have to be a woman who seemed to spend most of her time sighing at men when she was not inspiring them to compose songs about her eyes or her smile? "Very well, Min. I'll not ask where you've been, nor why you've come back in a dress, apparently wanting to ask a question of the Amerlin. Not now, at least." Her face said she meant to ask later, though, and get answers. "I suppose the mother knows who Elmindreda is?" "Of course. I should have known that when she said to send you straight in and alone." "The light alone knows why she puts up with you." She broke off with a concerned frown. "What is the matter, girl? Are you ill?" Min carefully blanked her face. No, I'm all right." For a moment, the keeper had been looking through a transparent mask of her own face, a screaming mask. "May I go in now, Liana Sedai?" Liana studied her a moment longer, then jerked her head toward the inner chamber.
Let me see.
"In with you."
Let me see.
Min's leap to obey would have satisfied the hardest taskmistress.
I have to cut that one. Boy.
The Amerlin seat's study had been occupied by many grand and powerful women over the centuries, and reminders of the fact filled the room, from the tall fireplace, all of golden marble from Candor, cold now, to the paneled walls of pale, oddly striped wood, iron hard, yet carved in wondrous beasts and wildly feathered birds. Those panels had been brought from the mysterious lands beyond the Aiel Waste, well over 1,000 years ago, and the fireplace was more than twice as old. The polished red stone of the floor had come from the mountains of mist. High arched windows let onto a balcony. The iridescent stone framing the windows shone like pearls, and had been salvaged from the remains of a city sunk into the sea of storms by the breaking of the world. No one had ever seen its like. The current occupant, Siwan Sanche, had been born a fisherman's daughter in Tyr, though, and the furnishings she had chosen were simple, if well-made and well-polished. She sat in a stout chair behind a large table, plain enough to have served a farmhouse. The only other chair in the room, just as plain and usually set off to one side, now stood in front of the table atop a small Tyran rug, simple in blue and brown and gold. Half a dozen books rested open on tall reading stands about the floor. And the one further back,
that's the old man, that's Tuffy.
A drawing hung above the fireplace, tiny fishing boats working among weeds in the fingers of the dragon, just as her father's boat had. At first glance, despite her smooth Aes Sedai features, Swan Sanche herself looked as simple as her furnishings. She herself was sturdy and handsome rather than beautiful, and the only bit of ostentation in her clothing was the broad stole of the Amerlin seat she wore, with one colored stripe for each of the 7 Ajas. Her age was indeterminate, as with any Aes Sedai. Not even a hint of gray showed in her dark hair. But her sharp blue eyes brooked no nonsense. and her firm jaw spoke of the determination of the youngest woman ever to be chosen Amerlin's seat. For over 10 years, Swan Sanche had been able to summon rulers and the powerful, and they had come, even if they hated the White Tower and feared Aes Sedai. As the Amerlin strode around in front of the table, Min set down her bundle and began an awkward curtsy, muttering irritably under her breath at having to do so. Not that she wanted to be disrespectful. That did not even occur to one facing a woman like Swan Sanche, but the bow she usually would have made seemed foolish in a dress, and she had only a rough idea of how to curtsy. Halfway down, with her skirts already spread, she froze like a crouching toad. Swan Sanche was standing there as regal as any queen, and for a moment she was also lying on the floor, naked. Aside from her being in only her skin, there was something odd about the image, but it vanished before Min could say what. It was as strong a viewing as she had ever seen, and she had no idea what it meant. "Seeing things again, are you?" the Amerlin said. "Well, I can certainly make use of that ability of yours. I could have used it all the months you were gone. But we'll not talk of that. What's done is done. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills." She smiled a tight smile. "But if you do it again, I'll have your hide for gloves. Stand up, girl. Lyanna forces enough ceremony on me in a month to last any sensible woman a year. I don't have time for it. Not these days. Now, what did you just see?" Min straightened slowly. It was a relief to be back with someone who knew of her talent, even if it was the Amerlin seat herself. She did not have to hide what she saw from the Amerlin. Far from it. You weren't wearing any clothes. I don't know what it means, Mother." Swan barked a short, mirthless laugh. "No doubt that I'll take a lover, but I have no time for that either. There's no time for winking at the men when you're busy bailing the boat." "Maybe," Min said slowly. It could have meant that, though she doubted it. "I just do not know. But, Mother, I've been seeing things ever since I walked into the tower. Something bad is going to happen, something terrible." She started with the Aes Sedai in the entry hall and told everything she had seen, as well as what everything meant, when she was sure. She held back what Gawain had said, though, or most of it. It was no use telling him not to anger the Amerlin if she did it for him. The rest she laid out as starkly as she had seen it. Some of her fear came out as she dredged it all up, seeing it all again. Her voice shook before she was done. The Amerlin's expression never changed. "So you spoke with young Gawain," she said when Min finished. "Well, I think I can convince him to keep quiet. And if I remember Sara correctly, the girl could do with some time working in the country. She'll spread no gossip hoeing a vegetable patch." "I don't understand," Min said. "Why should Gawain keep quiet? About what? I told him nothing. And Sara? Mother, perhaps I didn't make myself clear. Aes Sedai and warders are going to die. It has to mean a battle. And unless you send a lot of Aes Sedai and warders off somewhere, and servants too, I saw servants dead and injured too. Unless you do that, that battle will be here, in Tar Valon." "Did you see that?" the Amerlin demanded. "A battle? Do you know with your talent, or are you guessing?" "What else could it be? At least 4 Aes Sedai are as good as dead, Mother. I've only laid eyes on 9 of you since coming back, and 4 are going to die. And the warders, what else could it be?" "More things than I like to think of," Swan said grimly. "When? How long before this thing occurs?" Min shook her head. "I do not know. Most of it will happen in the space of a day, maybe 2, but that could be tomorrow, or a year from now, or 10. Let us pray for 10. If it comes tomorrow, there isn't much I can do to stop it." Min grimaced. Only 2 Aes Sedai besides Swan Sanche knew of what she could do, Moiraine and Varen Mathwin, who had tried to study her talent. None of them knew how it worked any more than she did, except that it had nothing to do with the power. Perhaps that was why only Moiraine seemed able to accept the fact that when she knew what a viewing meant, it happened. "Maybe it's the white cloaks, Mother. They were everywhere in Alendair when I crossed the bridge." She did not believe the Children of the Light had anything to do with what was coming, but she was reluctant to say what she believed. Believed, not knew, yet that was bad enough. But the Amerlin had begun shaking her head before she finished. They would try something if they could, I've no doubt. They would love to strike at the tower. But Eamon Valda won't move openly without orders from the Lord Captain Commander. And Padron Nial will not strike unless he thinks we're injured. He knows our strength too well to be foolish. For 1,000 years the White Cloaks have been like that. Silverpike in the reeds, waiting for a hint of Aes Sedai blood in the water. But we've shown them none yet, nor will we if I can help it. Yet if Valda did try something on his own, Swan cut her off. He has no more than 500 men close to Tar Valon, girl. He sent the rest away weeks ago to cause trouble elsewhere. The Shining Walls held off the Aiel, and Arthur Hawkwing, too. Valda will never break into Tar Valon unless the city is already falling apart from the inside. Her voice did not change as she went on. You very much want me to believe the trouble will come from the White Cloaks. Why? There was no gentleness in her eyes. Because I want to believe it, Min muttered. She licked her lips and spoke the words she did not want to say. The silver collar I saw on that one Aes Sedai. Mother, it looked like one of the collars the Shan Chan used to control women who can channel. Her voice dwindled as Swan's mouth twisted with distaste. These things, the Amerlin growled. As well, most people don't believe a quarter of what they hear about the Shan Chan. But there's more chance of it being the White Cloaks. If the Shan Chan land again anywhere, I will know it in days by pigeon, and it is a long way from the sea to Tar Valon. If they do reappear, I will have plenty of warning.
Cheers to you
Though
too,
I fear
Chris.
what you see is something far worse than the Shan Chan. I fear it can only be the Black Ajah. Only a handful of us know about them, and I don't relish what will happen when the knowledge becomes common, but they are the greatest immediate threat to the tower. Min realized she was clutching her skirt so hard that her hands hurt. Her mouth was dry as dust. The White Tower had always coldly denied the existence of a hidden Ajah dedicated to the Dark One. The surest way to anger an Aes Sedai was merely to mention such a thing. For the Amerlin seat herself to give the Black Ajah reality so casually made Min's spine turn to ice.
Yeah, I have yours
As if she had said nothing out
right
of the
here,
ordinary, the
D-Man.
Amerlin went on. But you didn't come all this way just to do your viewings. What word from Moiraine? I know everything from Arad Doman to Tarabon is in chaos, to say the least. That was saying the least,
Hey,
indeed.
D-Man, are those
Men
your
supporting the
prescription
Dragon
glasses,
Reborn
or
were
those
fighting
glasses
those
actually
opposing
help
him,
you
and had turned both
see
countries
the
to
letters
civil
better?
war, while they still fought each other for control of Alma
So
Plain.
now I gotta take my
Swan's
glasses off
tone
to
dismissed all
see
that
a
as a
lot
detail.
better.
But I've heard nothing of Randall Thor for months. He is the focus of everything. Where is he? What does Moiraine have him doing? Sit, girl, sit. She gestured to the chair in front of the table. Min approached the chair on wobbly legs and half fell into it. The Black Ajah. Oh, light. Aes Sedai were supposed to stand for the light. Even if she did not really trust them, there was always that. Aes Sedai and all the power of the Aes Sedai stood for the light and against the shadow. Only now it was not true any longer. She hardly heard herself say, "He's on his way to Tyr." Tyr?
Yeah, because mine, I gotta take
Kalendor,
mine
then.
off to be able to see him.
Moiraine means him to take the sword that cannot be touched out of the stone of Tyr. I swear I'll hang her in the sun to dry. I will make her wish she were a novice again. He cannot be ready for that yet. It was not. Min stopped to clear her throat. It was not Moiraine's doing. Rand left in the middle of the night by himself. The others followed, and Moiraine sent me to tell you. They could be in Tyr by now. For all I know, he could have Kalendor by now. Burn him, Swan barked. By now he could be dead. I wish he had never heard a word of the prophecies of the dragon. If I could keep him from hearing another, I would. But doesn't he have to fulfill the prophecies? I don't understand. The Amerlin leaned back against her table wearily, as though anyone even understands most of them. The prophecies aren't what makes him the Dragon Reborn. All that takes is for him to admit it, and he must have if he is going for Kalendor. The prophecies are meant to announce to the world who he is, to prepare him for what is coming, to prepare the world for it. If Moiraine can keep some control over him, she will guide him to the prophecies we can be sure of, when he is ready to face them. And for the rest, we trust that what he does is enough. We hope. For all I know, he has already fulfilled prophecies none of us understands. The light sendeth enough. So you do mean to control him? He said you'd try to use him, but this is the first I've heard you admit it. Min felt cold inside. Angry, she added, "You haven't done such a good job of it so far, you and Moiraine." Swan's tiredness seemed to slide from her shoulders. She straightened and stood looking down at Min. "You had best hope we can. Did you think we could just let him run about loose? Headstrong and stubborn, untrained, unprepared, maybe going mad already? Do you think we could trust to the pattern, to his destiny, to keep him alive like some story? This isn't a story. He isn't some invincible hero, and if his thread is snipped out of the pattern, the wheel of time won't notice his going, and the Creator will produce no miracles to save us. If Moiraine cannot reef his sails, he very well may get himself killed, and where are we then? Where is the world? The Dark One's prison is failing. He will touch the world again, it's only a matter of time. If Rand al'Thor is not there to face him in the last battle, if the headstrong young fool gets himself killed first, the world is doomed. The War of the Power all over again, with no Luz Theron and his 100 companions. Then fire and shadow forever." She stopped suddenly, peering at Min's face. "So that's the way the wind sets, is it? You and Rand. I did not expect this." Min shook her head vigorously, felt her cheeks coloring. "Of course not. It's the last battle, and the Dark One. Light, just thinking about the Dark One loose ought to be enough to freeze a warder's marrow, and the Black Ajah—" "Don't try to dissemble," the Amyrlin said sharply. "Do you think this is the first time I ever saw a woman afraid for a man's life? You might as well admit it." Min squirmed on her chair. Swan's eyes dug at her, knowing and impatient. "All right," she muttered finally. "I'll tell you all of it, and much good it does either of us. The first time I ever saw Rand, I saw 3 women's faces, and one of them was mine. I've never seen anything about myself before or since, but I knew what it meant. I was going to fall in love with him. All 3 of us were." "3? The other 2, who are they?" Min gave her a bitter smile. "The faces were blurred. I don't know who they are." "Nothing to say that he would love you in return?" "Nothing. He has never looked at me twice. I think he sees me as a sister. So don't think you can use me as leash on him, because it will not work. Yet you do love him." "I don't have any choice." Min tried to make her voice less sullen. "I tried treating it as a joke, but I can't laugh anymore. You may not believe me, but when I know what it means, it happens." The Amyrlin tapped a finger against her lips and looked at Min consideringly. That look worried Min. She had not meant to make such a show of herself, nor to tell as much as she had. She had not told everything, but she knew she should have learned by now not to give an Aes Sedai a lever, even if she did not see how it could be used. Aes Sedai were skilled at finding ways. "Mother, I've delivered Moiraine's message, and I've told everything I know of what my viewings meant. There's no reason now I can't put on my own clothes and go." "Go where?" "Tyr." After talking with Gawain, trying to make sure he did not do something foolish. She wished she dared ask where Egwene and the other 2 were, but if the Amyrlin would not tell Elaine's brother, there was small chance she would tell Min. And Swan Sanche still had that weighing look in her eyes. "Or wherever Rand is. I may be a fool, but I'm not the first woman to be a fool over a man. The first to be a fool over the Dragon Reborn. It will be dangerous being close to Rand al'Thor once the world finds out who he is, what he is. And if he now wields Kalendor, the world will learn soon enough. Half will want to kill him anyway, as if by killing him they can stop the last battle, stop the Dark One from breaking free. A good many will die close to him. It might be better for you to stay here. The Ammerlin sounded sympathetic, but Min did not believe it. She did not believe Swan Sanche was capable of sympathy. I'll take the risk. Maybe I can help him. With what I see. It isn't even as if the tower would be that much safer. Not so long as there is one Red Sister here. They'll see a man who can channel and forget the last battle and the prophecies of the dragon. So will many others, Swan broke in calmly. Old ways of thinking are hard to shed, for Aes Sedai as for anyone else. Min gave her a puzzled look. She seemed to be taking Min's side of the thing now. It is no secret I am friends with Egwene and Nynaeve, and no secret they're from the same village as Rand. For the Red Ajah, that will be connection enough. When the tower finds out what he is, I would probably be arrested before the day is out. So will Egwene and Nynaeve, if you don't have them hidden away somewhere. Then you mustn't be recognized. You catch no fish if they see the net. I suggest you forget your coat and breeches for a time. The Ammerlin smiled like a cat smiling at a mouse. What fish do you expect to catch with me? Min asked in a faint voice. She thought she knew, and hoped desperately she was wrong. Her hope did not stop the Ammerlin from saying, the Black Ajah. 13 of them fled, but I fear some remain. I cannot be sure who I can trust. For a while I was afraid to trust anyone. You are no dark friend, I know, and your particular talent may just be some help. At the very least, you'll be another trustworthy pair of eyes. You've been planning this since I walked in, haven't you? That's why you want to keep Gawain and Sara quiet. Anger built up inside Min like steam
Hey,
in
Fishing
a kettle.
Studios, how you
The
doing,
woman
bro?
said frog and expected
Since you're
people to
here,
jump. That they
let's do a
usually
dab.
did just made it worse. She was no frog, no dancing puppet. Is this what you did to Egwene and Elaine and Nynaeve? Send them off after the Black Ajah? I wouldn't put it past you. You tend your own nets, child, and let those girls tend theirs. As far as you are concerned, they are working penance on a farm. Do I make myself plain? That unwavering stare made Min shift on her chair. It was easy to defy the Ammerlin until she started staring at you with those sharp, cold blue eyes. Yes, Mother. The meekness of her reply rankled, but a glance at the Ammerlin convinced her to let it lie. She plucked at the fine wool of her dress. I suppose it won't kill me to wear this a little longer. Suddenly, Swan looked amused. Min felt her hackles rising. I fear that won't be enough. Min in a dress is still Min in a dress to anyone who looks close. You cannot always wear a cloak with the hood up. No, you must change everything that can be changed. For one thing, you will continue to go by Elminreda. It is your name, after all. Min winced. Your hair is almost as long as Lyanna's, long enough to put in curls. For the rest, I never had any use for rouge and powder and paints, but Lyanna remembers the use of them. Min's eyes had grown wider by the word since the mention of curls. Oh, no, she gasped. No one will take you for Min who wears breeches once Lyanna makes you into a perfect Elminreda. Oh, no! As to why you are staying in the tower, a reason suitable for a fluttery young woman who looks nothing at all like Min.
Yeah, Fishing Studios, D-Man does a lot of that diamond art too.
To break in.
He gets
Yes,
down on it too.
I will let it be put about that Mistress Elminreda managed to encourage 2 suitors to the point that she has to take shelter from them in the tower until she can decide between
not on the
them.
level that D-Man does him on.
Still claim sanctuary each year, and sometimes for reasons as silly. Her face hardened, and her eyes sharpened. If you're still thinking of Tyr, think again. Consider whether you can be of more help to Rand there or here. If the Black Oddjaw brings the tower down, or worse, gains control,
Hell yeah,
he
appreciate
loses
whoever
even the little
sent
help
that.
I can give. So, are you a woman or a lovesick girl? Trapped. Min could see it as plainly as a shackle on her leg. Do you always get your way with people, Mother? The Amerlin's smile was even colder this time. Usually, child.
Hell yeah, appreciate it, bro.
Shifting her red-fringed shawl, Elida stared thoughtfully at the
Hell
door
yeah,
to the Amerlin's study,
appreciate it,
through
brother.
which the two young women had just vanished. The novice came back out almost immediately, took one look at Elida's face, and bleated like a frightened sheep. Elida thought she recognized her, though she could not bring the girl's name to mind. She had more important uses for her time than teaching wretched children. Your name? Sarah, Elida, said I. The girl's reply was a breathless squeak. Elida might have no interest in novices, but the novices knew her and her reputation.
I don't see how he's able to
daydreamer with
sit there as
moderate
long as he
ability
does and does them at one sitting.
It was doubtful she knew
If I
anything
did
more
that,
than
my
Elida
back
had
could be
already
killing
seen
me.
and heard, or remembered much more than
Now I had
smile, for that matter.
the right setup in the right space.
Elida flicked a dismissive
It'd be
hand.
alright.
The girl dropped a curtsy so deep her face almost
But my
touched
light
the
table
floor
I'm
tiles,
using
then
is
fled at a
like
dead
about
run. Elida did not see her go.
that thick.
The red sister had
It's a
turned
big old
away,
box.
already
It's a
forgetting the novice.
homemade light
As she
table.
swept down the corridor, not a line marred her smooth features.
So I'm up there
but
like
her thoughts
this
boiled furiously.
in my
She
seat.
did not even notice the servants, the novices and accepted, who scrambled out of her way, curtsying as she passed. Once she almost walked over a brown sister with her nose in a sheaf of notes.
I gotta eventually save up and get
back with a startled squawk.
a decent, like actual real light table,
she knew
should I
the
say.
young woman who had gone in to see the Amerlin. Min, who had spent so much time with the Amerlin on her first visit to the tower, though for no reason
I've found some here and there that are
who was such close friends with
relatively
Elaine,
cheap, but
Egwene, and
it's
Nynaeve.
more than what I
The
have.
Amerlin was hiding the whereabouts of those three. Elida was sure of it. All reports that they were serving penance on a farm had come at third or fourth hand from Swan Sanche, more than enough distance to hide any twisting of words to avoid an outright lie.
Yeah, I can see
Not
the
to
eyes
mention
starting
the
to
fact
hurt.
that all Elida's considerable efforts to find this farm had yielded nothing. A light burned her.
I find my
For a moment, open anger
my
painted her
hands
face.
start
She was
not
not sure
wanting
whether
to
she meant Swan
work
Sanche or the
properly
daughter
from doing
heir.
it for so
Either
long.
would serve. A slender accepted heard her, glanced at her face, and went as white as her own dress. Elida strode by without seeing her. Apart from everything else, it infuriated her that she could not find Elaine. Elida had the foretelling sometimes, the ability to foresee future events.
Shit.
If it came seldom and
Give me
faintly,
1 second,
still
I'll be
more
right
than
back.
any Aes Sedai had had since Gitara Moroso, dead now 20 years. The very first thing Elida had ever foretold, while still unaccepted, and had known enough even then to keep to herself, was that the royal line of Andor would be the key to defeating the Dark One in the last battle. She had attached herself to Morghese as soon as it was clear Morghese would succeed to the throne, had built her influence year by patient year, and now all her effort, all her sacrifice, she might have been Amerlin herself had she not concentrated all her energies on Andor, might be for naught because Elaine had disappeared. With an effort, she forced her thoughts back to what was important now. Egwene and Nynaeve came from the same village as that strange young man, Randall Thor, and Min knew him as well, however much she had tried to hide the fact. Randall Thor lay at the heart of it. Elida had only seen him once, supposedly a shepherd from the Two Rivers, in Andor, but looking every inch the Aiel man. The foretelling had come to her at the sight of him. He was ta'veren, one of those rare individuals who, instead of being woven into the pattern as the wheel of time chose, forced the pattern to shape itself around them, for a time at least. And Elida had seen chaos swirling around him, division and strife for Andor, perhaps for even more of the world. But Andor must be kept whole, whatever else happened. That first foretelling had convinced her of that. There were more threads, enough to snare Swan in her own web. If the rumors were to be believed, there were 3 ta'veren, not just one. All 3 from the same village, this Emmons Field, and all 3 near the same age, odd enough to occasion a good deal of talk in the tower. And on Swan's journey to Shinar, nearly a year ago now, she had seen them, even talked with them. Randall Thorpe, Perrin Abara, Malcolm Colton. It was said to be mere happenstance, just fortuitous chance, so it was said. Those who said it did not know what Elida knew.
Because, what, I just took
When
a picture
Elida
what I'm
saw
using
the
as a
young
light
Althor
table.
man, it had been Moiraine who spirited him away. Moiraine who had accompanied him and the other 2 ta'veren in Shinar. Moiraine de Mordred, who had been Swan Sanche's closest friend when they were novices together. Had Elida been one
But
to
it's
make
pretty much
wagers,
that box
she would have
is what my
wagered
light
that no
table
one
is.
else in the tower remembered that friendship. On the day they were raised Aes Sedai at the end of the Aiel War, Swan and Moiraine had walked away from one another, and afterward behaved almost like strangers.
Yes,
But
it's
Elida had been one of the accepted over
homemade
those 2
one.
novices, had taught their lessons and chastised them for slacking at chores, and she
So
remembered.
puts me up
She
there
could
like
hardly
that.
believe that their plot could stretch back so far. Althor could not have been born much before that. Yet it was the last link to tie them all together. For her, it was enough. Whatever Swan was up to, she had to be stopped. Turmoil and chaos multiplied on every side. The Dark One was sure to break free. The very thought made Elida shiver and wrap her shawl around her more
Yeah,
tightly.
I've been looking
And the
into one
tower
now,
had
because
to be aloof from
that's the
mundane
biggest one,
struggles
huh?
to face that. The tower had to be
I
free
just
to
gotta
pull
get
the
the
strings
money
to make the
together for
nation
that.
stand together, free of the troubles Randall Thor would bring. Somehow he had to be stopped from destroying Andor. She had told no one what she knew of Althor. She meant to deal with him quietly, if possible. The hall of the tower already spoke of watching, even guiding these ta'veren. They would never agree to dispose of them, of the one in particular, as he must be disposed of, for the good of the tower, for the good of the world. She made a sound in her throat, close to a growl. Swan had always been headstrong, even as a novice, had always thought much of herself for a poor fisherman's daughter. But how could she be fool enough to mix the tower in this without telling the hall? She knew what was coming as well as anyone. The only way it could be worse was if... Abruptly, Elida stopped.
Because I actually got on my,
Could it
at least
be
on
that
my
this
watch
Althor
list on
could shadow,
Timo,
or one of the
a
others?
nice
Most likely
light
it
I
would be
want to get,
Althor.
but I just gotta get
Surely not.
extra money
Not
for
even
it.
Swan would touch one of those. She could not. Who knows what that woman could do, she muttered. She was never fit to be the Aralan's seat. Talking to yourself, Elida? I know you Reds never have friends outside your own Aja, but surely you have friends to talk to inside it. Elida turned her head to regard Alviarin. The swan-necked Aes Sedai stared back with the insufferable coolness that was a hallmark of the white Aja. There was no love lost between red and white. They had stood on opposite sides in the hall of the tower for 1,000 years. White stood with blue, and Swan had been a blue, but whites prided themselves on dispassionate logic. Walk with me, Elida said. Alviarin hesitated before falling in beside her. At first the white sister arched a disparaging eyebrow at what Elida had to say concerning Swan, but before the end she was frowning in concentration. You have no proof of anything improper, she said, when Elida finally fell silent. Not yet, Elida said firmly. She permitted herself a tight smile when Alviarin nodded. It was a beginning. One way or another, Swan would be stopped before she could destroy the tower.
Well hidden in a stand of tall leatherleaf above the north bank of the river Tarn, Dane Bornhold tossed back his white cloak, with its flaring golden sun on the breast, and raised the stiff leather tube of a looking-glass to his eye. A cloud of tiny bite-me's buzzed around his face, but he ignored them. In the village of Tarn Ferry, across the river, tall stone houses stood on high foundations against the floods that came every spring. Villagers hung out of windows or waited on stoops to stare at the 30 white-cloaked riders sitting their horses in burnished plate and mail.
Right there.
A delegation of village men and women were meeting with the horsemen. Rather, they were listening to Jared Byer.
It's just cut it down right there because I don't have much space. My dog's taking up the space I had it at.
Voice. Let them think there is a chance some fool will try to take it. Then there's killing to do, and another fool will try to avenge the first, so there's more killing. Put the fear of the light into them from the first. Let them know no one will be harmed if they do as they're told, and you'll have no trouble. His jaw tightened at the thought of his father, dead now. He was going to do something about that, and soon. He was sure only Byer knew why he had leaped to accept this command. Aimed at an all-but-forgotten district in the hinterlands of Andor, and Byer would hold his tongue. Byer had been as dedicated to Dane's father as a hound, and he had transferred all that loyalty to Dane. Bornhold had had no hesitation in naming Byer second under him when Eamon Valda gave him the command. Byer turned his horse and rode back onto the ferry. Immediately, the ferrymen cast off and began hauling the barge across by means of a heavy rope slung across the swiftly flowing water. Byer glanced at the men at the rope. They eyed him nervously as they tramped the length of the barge, then trotted back to take up the cable again. It all looked good. Lord Bornhold? Bornhold lowered the looking-glass and turned his head. The hard-faced man who had appeared at his shoulder stood rigid, staring straight ahead from under a conical helmet. Even after the hard journey from Tarvalin, and Bornhold had pressed every mile, his armor shone as brightly as his snowy cloak with its golden sunburst. Yes, child Ivan. 100 men Faran sent me, my lord. It's the Tinkers. Ordeith was talking to 3 of them, my lord. And now none of the 3 can be found. Blood and ashes. Bornhold spun on his boot heel and strode back into the trees, Ivan at his heels. Out of sight of the river, white-cloaked horsemen clogged the spaces between leather leaves and pines, lances held with casual familiarity, or bows laid across their pommels. The horses stamped their hooves impatiently and whipped their tails. The riders waited more stolidly. This would not be their first river crossing into strange territory, and this time, no one would be trying to stop them. In a large clearing beyond the mounted men stood a caravan of the pt.1, the traveling people, Tinkers. Nearly 100 horse-drawn wagons, like small boxy houses on wheels, made an eye-jarring blend of colors, red and green and yellow, and every hue imaginable in combinations only a tinker's eye could like. The people themselves wore clothes that made their wagons look dull. They sat on the ground in a large cluster, eyeing the mounted men with an oddly calm unease. The thin crying of a child was swiftly comforted by its mother. Nearby, dead mastiffs made a mound already buzzing with flies. Tinkers would not raise a hand even to defend themselves, and the dogs had been mostly show, but Bornhold had not been willing to take a chance. 6 men were all he had thought necessary to watch Tinkers. Even with stiff faces, they looked embarrassed. None glanced at the 7th man, sitting a horse near the wagons, a bony little man with a big nose and a dark gray coat that looked too big for him despite the fineness of its cut. Faran, a bearded boulder of a man, yet light on his feet for all his height and width, stood glaring at all 7 equally. The 100 man pressed a gauntleted hand to his heart in salute, but left all talking to Bornhold. A word with you, Master Ordeith, Bornhold said quietly. The bony man cocked his head, looking at Bornhold for a long moment before dismounting. Faran growled, but Bornhold kept his voice low. 3 of the Tinkers cannot be found, Master Ordeith. Did you perhaps put your own suggestion into practice? The first words out of Ordeith's mouth when he saw the Tinkers had been, Kill them, they're of no use. Bornhold had killed his share of men, but he had never matched the casualness with which the little man had spoken. Ordeith rubbed a finger along the side of his large nose. Now, why would I be killing them? And after you ripped me so for just suggesting it. His Lugarder accent was heavy today. It came and went without him seeming to notice. Another thing about the man that disturbed Bornhold. Then you allowed them to escape, yes? Well, as to that, I did take a few of them off where I could see what they knew. Undisturbed, you see. what they knew. What under the light could Tinkers know of use to us? There's no way of telling until you ask, now is there? Ordeith said. I didn't hurt any of them much, and I told them to get themselves back to the wagons. Who would be thinking they'd have the nerve to run away with so many of your men about? Bornhold realized he was grinding his teeth. His orders had been to make the best possible time to meet this odd fellow, who would have more orders for him. Bornhold liked none of it, though both sets of orders bore the seal and signature of Pedron Nile, Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light. Too much had been left unsaid, including Ordeith's exact status. The little man was there to advise Bornhold, and Bornhold was to cooperate with Ordeith. Whether Ordeith was under his command had been left vague, and he did not like the strong implication that he should heed the fellow's advice. Even the reason for sending so many of the children into this backwater had been vague. To root out dark friends, of course, and spread the light, that went without saying.
It's
but close to half a legion
another
of Andor
book
and
in the
soil
Wheel
of
of
that
Time
nation,
series.
the Order risked much if word of it reached the Queen in Camelin.
It's the
Too
Shadow
much to be balanced
Rising.
by the few answers Bornhold had been given. It all came back to Ordeith. Bornhold did not understand how the Lord Captain Commander could trust this man, with his sly grins and his black moods and his haughty stares, so you could never be sure what kind of man you were talking to, not to mention his accent changing in the middle of a sentence. The 50 children who had accompanied Ordeith were as sullen and frowning a lot as Bornhold had never seen. He thought Ordeith must have picked them himself to have so many sour scowls, and it said something of the man that he would choose that sort. Even his name, Ordeith, meant wormwood in the old tongue. Still, Bornhold had his own reasons to be where he was. He would cooperate with the man, since he had to. But only as much as he had to. Master Ordeith, he said, in a carefully level tone, this ferry is the only way in or out of the Two Rivers district. That was not quite the truth. According to the map he had, there was no way across the Tarn except here, and the upper reaches of the Manetheren, bordering the region on the south, had no fords. To the east lay bogs and swamps. Even so, there must be a way out westward, across the mountains of mist, though his map stopped at the edge of the range. At best, however, it would be a hard crossing that many of his men might not survive, and he did not intend to let Ordeith know of even that small chance. When it is time to leave, if I find Andran soldiers holding this bank, you will ride with the first to cross. You will find it interesting to see at close hand the difficulty of forcing a way across a river this wide, yes? This is your first command, is it not? Ordeith's voice held a hint of mockery. This may be a part of Andor on the map, but Camelin has not sent a tax collector this far west in generations. Even if those three talk, who will believe three tinkers? If you think the danger is too great, remember whose seal is on your orders. Farron glanced at Bornhold, half reached for his sword. Bornhold shook his head slightly, and Farron let his hand fall. I mean to cross the river, Master Ordeith. I will cross if the next word I hear is that Garth Bryn and the Queen's guards will be here by sundown. Of course, Ordeith said, suddenly soothing. There will be as much glory here as at Tar Valon, I assure you. His deep, dark eyes took a glazed look, stared at something in the distance. There are things in Tar Valon I want, too. Bornhold shook his head. And I must cooperate with him. Jared Byer drew up and swung down from his saddle beside Farron. As tall as 100-man, Byer was a long-faced man with dark, deep-set eyes. He looked as if every ounce of fat had been boiled off him. The village is secured, my lord. Lucellin is making certain no one slips off. They nearly soiled themselves when I mentioned dark friends. None in their village, they say. The folk further south are the dark friend kind, though, they say. Further south, is it? Bornhold said briskly. We shall see. Put 300s across the river, Byer. Farron's first. The rest to follow after the Tinkers cross. And make sure no more of them get away, yes? We will scour the Two Rivers, Ordeith broke in. His narrow face was twisted. Saliva bubbled at his lips. We will flog them and flay them and sear their souls. I promised him. He'll come to me now. He will come. Bornhold nodded for Byer and Farron to carry out his commands. A madman, he thought. The Lord Captain Commander has tied me to a madman. But at least I will find my path to Perrin of the Two Rivers. Whatever it takes, I will avenge my father.
From a colonnaded terrace on a hilltop, the High Lady Suroth looked across the wide, lopsided bowl of Cantorin Harbor. The shaven sides of her scalp left a wide crest of black hair that fell down her back. Her hands rested lightly on a smooth stone balustrade as white as her pristine gown with its hundreds of pleats. There was a faint rhythmic clicking as she unconsciously drummed her fingers with their inch-long nails, the first two on each hand lacquered blue. A slight breeze blew off of the Arath Ocean, carrying more than a hint of salt in its coolness. Two young women kneeling against the wall behind the High Lady held white-plumed fans ready if the breeze should fail. Two more women and 4 young men completed the line of crouching figures, waiting to serve. Barefoot, all 8 wore sheer robes to please the High Lady's aesthetic senses with the clean lines of their limbs and the grace of their motions. At the moment, Suroth truly did not see the servants, no more than one saw furniture. She saw the 6 Death Watch guards at either end of the colonnade, though, stiff as statues with their black tasseled spears and black lacquered shields. They symbolized her triumph and her danger. The Death Watch guards served only the Empress and her chosen representatives, and they would kill or die with equal fervor, whichever was necessary. There was a saying, "On the heights the paths are paved with daggers." Her fingernails clicked on the stone balustrade. How thin was the razor's edge she walked. Vessels of the Atha'an Niera, the sea folk, filled the inner harbor behind the seawall, even the largest looking too narrow for their length. Cut rigging made their yards and booms slant at crazy angles. Their decks were empty, their crews ashore and under guard, as were any in these islands who had the skill to sail the open sea. Great bluff-bowed Shan-Chan ships by the score lay in the outer harbor and anchored off the harbor mouth. One, with its ribbed sails bellied with wind, escorted a swarm of small fishing boats back toward the island port. If the smaller craft scattered, some of them might escape, but the Shan-Chan ship carried a Damani, and one demonstration of a Damani's power had quelled any such thoughts. The charred, shattered hulk of the sea folk ship still lay on a mud flat near the harbor mouth. How long she would manage to keep sea folk elsewhere, and the accursed mainlanders from learning that she held these islands, Suroth did not know. It will be long enough, she told herself. It must be long enough. She had worked something of a miracle in rallying most of the Shan-Chan forces after the debacle the High Lord Turak had led them to. All but a handful of the vessels that had escaped from Falma lay under her control, and no one questioned her right to command the High Lean, the Forerunners. If her miracle held, no one on the mainland suspected they were here, waiting to take back the lands the Empress had sent them to reclaim, waiting to achieve the Koren, the return. Her agents already scouted the way. There would be no need to return to the Court of the Nine Moons and apologize to the Empress for a failure not even hers. The thought of having to apologize to the Empress sent a tremor through her. Such an apology was always humiliating and usually painful, but what made her shiver was the chance of being denied death at the end, of being forced to continue as if nothing had occurred, while everyone, common as well as the blood, knew her degradation. A handsome young serving man sprang to her side, bearing a pale green robe worked in brilliantly plumaged birds of delight. She held her arms out for the garment and noticed him no more than a clod of dirt beside her velvet slipper. To escape that apology, she must retake what had been lost 1,000 years ago, and to do that, she must deal with this man who, her mainland agents told her, claimed to be the Dragon Reborn. If I cannot find a way to deal with him, the displeasure of the Empress will be the least of my worries. Turning smoothly, she entered the long room fronting the terrace, its outer wall all doors and tall windows to catch the breezes. The pale wood of the walls, smooth and glistening like satin, pleased Suroth, but she had removed the furnishings of the old owner, the former Afa'an Miera governor of Cantorin, and replaced them with a few tall screens, most painted with birds or flowers. Two were different. One showed a great spotted cat of the Centaur, as large as a pony. The other a black mountain eagle, crest erect like a pale crown, and snowy-tipped wings spread to their full 7 feet. Such screens were considered vulgar, but Suroth liked animals. Unable to bring her menagerie with her across the Arith Ocean, she had had the screens made to depict her two favorites. She had never taken kindly to being balked in anything. 3 women awaited her as she had left them, 2 kneeling, 1 lying prostrate on the bare polished floor, patterned in inlays of light and dark wood. The kneeling women wore the dark blue dresses of Suldam, red panels embroidered with forked silver lightning on the breast and on the sides of their skirts. One of the 2, Alwyn, a sharp-faced, blue-eyed woman with a perpetual glower, had the left side of her head shaved. The rest of her hair hung to her shoulder in a light brown braid. Suroth's mouth tightened momentarily at the sight of Alwyn. No Suldam had ever before been raised to the Sojin, the hereditary upper servants of the blood, much less to a voice of the blood. Yet there had been reasons in Alwyn's case. Alwyn knew too much. Still, it was to the woman lying face down, all in plain dark gray, that Suroth directed her attention. A wide collar of silvery metal encircled the woman's neck, connected by a shining leash to a bracelet of the same material on the wrist of the second Suldam, Taisa. By means of leash and collar, the Idam, Taisa could control the gray-clad woman, and she had to be controlled. She was Damani, a woman who could channel, and thus too dangerous to be allowed to run loose. Memories of the armies of the night were still strong in Shan-Chan 1,000 years after their destruction. Suroth's eyes flickered uneasily to the 2 Suldam. She no longer trusted any Suldam, and yet she had no choice but to trust them. No one else could control the Damani, and without the Damani, the very concept was unthinkable. The power of Shan-Chan, the very power of the Crystal Throne, was built on controlled Damani. There were too many things about which Suroth had no choice to suit her, such as Alwyn, who watched as if she had been Sojin all of her life. No, as if she were of the blood itself and knelt because she chose to. Pura. The Damani had had another name when she was one of the hated Aes Sedai before falling into Shan-Chan hands, but Suroth neither knew what it had been nor cared. The gray-clad woman tensed, but did not raise her head. Her training had been particularly harsh. I will ask again, Pura. How does the White Tower control this man who calls himself the Dragon Reborn? The Damani moved her head a fraction, enough to shoot a frightened look at Taisa. If her answer was displeasing, the Suldam could make her feel pain without raising a finger, by means of the Idam. The Tower would try to control a false dragon, High Lady, Pura said breathily. They would capture him and gentle him. Taisa looked an indignant question at the High Lady. The answer had avoided Suroth's query, had perhaps even implied that one of the blood had spoken untruth. Suroth gave a slight shake of her head, the merest sideways motion. She had no wish to wait while the Damani recovered from punishment, and Taisa bowed her head in acquiescence. Once again, Pura, what do you know of Aes Sedai? Suroth's mouth twisted at being defiled with that name. Alwyn gave a grunt of distaste. Aes Sedai aiding this man. I warn you. Our soldiers fought women of the Tower, women channeling the power at Falmouth, so do not attempt to deny it. Pura does not know, High Lady. There was urgency in the Damani's voice, and uncertainty. She darted another wide-eyed glance at Taisa. It was clear that she wanted desperately to be believed. Perhaps the Amerlin, or the Hall of the Tower. No, they would not. Pura does not know, High Lady. The man can channel, Suroth said curtly. The woman on the floor moaned, though she had heard the same words from Suroth before. Saying it again made Suroth's stomach knot. but she allowed nothing to show on her face. Little of what had happened at Falma had been the work of women channeling. Damani could sense that, and the Suldam wearing the bracelet always knew what her Damani felt. That meant it had to have been the work of the man. It also meant he was incredibly powerful. So powerful that Suroth had once or twice found herself wondering, growing queasy, whether he might really be the dragon reborn. That cannot be, she told herself firmly. In any case, it made no difference to her plans. It is impossible to believe that even the White Tower would allow such a man to walk free. How do they control him? The Damani lay there silently, face to the floor, shoulders shaking, weeping. Answer the High Lady, Taisa said sharply. Taisa did not move, but Pura gasped, flinching as if struck across the hips. A blow delivered through the
Chris,
eyebrow.
you have a good one, brother.
Pura does not know. The Damani stretched out a hesitant hand, as though to touch Suroth's foot. Please, Pura has learned to obey. Pura speaks only the truth. Please do not punish Pura. Suroth stepped back smoothly, letting none of her irritation show. That she should be forced to move by a Damani, that she could almost be touched by one who could channel. She felt a need to bathe, as if the touch had actually landed. Taisa's dark eyes bulged in outrage at the Damani's effrontery. Her cheeks were scarlet with shame that this should happen while she wore the woman's bracelet. She seemed torn between prostrating herself beside the Damani to beg forgiveness and punishing the woman then and there. Alwyn stared a thin-lipped contempt, every line of her face saying that such things did not happen when she wore a bracelet. Suroth raised one finger a fraction, making a small gesture every Sojin knew from childhood, a simple dismissal. Alwyn hesitated before interpreting it, then tried to cover her slip by rounding harshly on Taisa. Take this creature from the presence of the High Lady Suroth, and when you have punished her, go to Surella and tell her that you control your charges as if you had never worn the bracelet before. Tell her that you are to be... Suroth shut Alwyn's voice from her mind. None of that had been her command except the dismissal, but quarrels between Suldam were beneath her notice. She wished she knew whether Pura was managing to hide something. Her agents reported claims that the women of the White Tower could not lie. It had not been possible to force Pura to tell even a simple lie, to say that a white scarf was black. Yet that was not enough to be conclusive. Some might accept the tears of the Damani, her protests of inability, whatever the Suldam did, but none who did would have risen to lead the return. Pura might have some reservoir of will left, might be clever enough to try using the belief that she was incapable of lying. None of the women collared on the mainland were fully obedient, trustworthy, not like the Damani brought from Shanchan. None of them truly accepted what they were, as Shanchan Damani did. Who could say what secrets might hide in one who had called herself Aes Sedai? Not for the first time, Suroth wished she had the other Aes Sedai who had been captured on Toman Head. With two to question, there would have been a better chance to catch lies and evasions. It was a useless wish. The other could be dead, drowned at sea, or on display at the Court of the Nine Moons. Some of the ships Suroth had failed to gather in must have managed the journey back across the ocean, and one might well have carried the woman. She herself had sent a ship carrying carefully crafted reports nearly half a year ago now, as soon as she had solidified her control of the Forerunners, with a captain and crew from families that had served hers since Luthair Pendrag had proclaimed himself emperor nearly 1,000 years ago. Dispatching the ship had been a gamble, for the Empress might send back someone to take Suroth's place. Not sending the vessel would have been a greater, though. Only utter and crushing victory could have saved her then. Perhaps not even that. So the Empress knew of Falma, knew of Turak's disaster and Suroth's intention to go on. But what did she think of that knowledge, and what was she doing about it? That was a greater concern than any Damani, whatever she had been before collaring. Yet the Empress did not know everything. The worst could not be entrusted to any messenger, no matter how loyal. It would only be passed from Suroth's lips directly to the ear of the Empress, and Suroth had taken pains to keep it so. Only 4 still lived who knew the secret, and 2 of those would never speak it to anyone, not of their own volition. Only 3 deaths can hold it more tightly. Suroth did not realize she had murmured the last aloud until Alwyn said, "And yet the High Lady needs all 3 alive." The woman had a properly humble suppleness to her stance, even to the trick of downcast eyes that still managed to watch for any sign from Suroth. Her voice was humble, too. "Who can say, High Lady, what the Empress, may she live forever, might do if she learned of an attempt to keep such knowledge from her?" Instead of answering, Suroth made the tiny dismissing gesture once more. Again Alwyn hesitated. This time it had to be simple reluctance to leave. The woman rose above herself, before bowing deeply and backing out of Suroth's presence. With an effort, Suroth found calmness. The Suldam and the other 2 were a problem she could not solve now, but patience was a necessity for the blood. Those who lacked it were likely to end in the Tower of Ravens. On the terrace, kneeling servants leaned forward a hair in readiness as she appeared again. The soldiers maintained their watch to see she was undisturbed. Suroth took up her place before the balustrade, this time staring out to sea, toward the mainland, hundreds of miles to the east. To be the one who successfully led the forerunners, who began the return, would bring much honor. Perhaps even adoption into the family of the Empress, though that was an honor not without complications. To also be the one who captured this dragon, whether false or real, along with the means of controlling his incredible power. But if, when I take him, do I give him to the Empress? That is the question. Her long nails began to click again on the wide stone rail.
Chapter 2. Whirlpools in the Pattern. Inland, the hot night wind blew. North, across the vast delta called the Fingers of the Dragon, a winding maze of waterways, broad and narrow, some choked with knife grass. Vast plains of reeds separated clusters of low islands, forested with spider-rooted trees seen nowhere else. Eventually, the delta gave way to its source, the river Aranin. The river's great width, spotted with the lights of small boats lantern fishing. Boats and lights bobbed wildly, sudden and unexpected, and some older men muttered of evil things passing in the night. Young men laughed, but they hauled the nets more vigorously, too, eager to be home and out of the dark. The stories said evil could not cross your threshold unless you invited it in. That was what the stories said. But out in the darkness... The last tang of salt had vanished by the time the wind reached the great city of Tyr, hard by the river, where tile-roofed inns and shops shouldered against tall, towered palaces gleaming in the moonlight. Yet no place was half so tall as the massive bulk, almost a mountain, that stretched from city's heart to water's edge. The Stone of Tyr, fortress of legend, the oldest stronghold of mankind, erected in the last days of the breaking of the world. While nations and empires rose and fell, were replaced and fell anew, the stone stood. It was the rock on which armies had broken spears and swords and hearts for 3,000 years. And in all that time it had never fallen to invading arms. Until now. The streets of the city, the taverns and inns, were all but empty in the muggy darkness, people keeping cautiously within their own walls. Who held the stone was Lord of Tyr, city and nation. That was the way it had always been, and the people of Tyr accepted it always. By daylight they would cheer their new lord with enthusiasm, as they had cheered the old. By night, they huddled together, shivering despite the heat when the wind howled across their rooftops like 1,000 keening mourners. Strange new hopes danced in their heads, hopes none in Tyr had dared for 100 generations. Hopes mixed with fears as old as the breaking. The wind lashed the long white banner catching the moon above the stone as if trying to rip it away. Along its length marched a sinuous figure like a legged serpent, golden-maned like a lion, scaled in scarlet and gold, seeming to ride the wind. banner of prophecy, hoped for and dreaded. Banner of the dragon reborn. Harbinger of the world's salvation, and herald of a new breaking to come. As if outraged at such defiance, the wind dashed itself against the hard walls of the stone. The dragon banner floated, unheeding in the night, awaiting greater storms. In a room more than halfway up the stone's southern face, Perrin sat on the chest at the foot of his canopied bed and watched the dark-haired young woman pacing up and down. There was a trace of wariness in his golden eyes. Usually Fail bantered with him, maybe poked a little gentle fun at his deliberate ways. Tonight, she had not said 10 words since coming through the door. He could smell the rose petals that had been folded into her clothes after cleaning, and the scent that was just her. And in the hint of clean perspiration, he smelled nervousness. Fail almost never showed nerves. Wondering why she did now set an itch between his shoulders that had nothing to do with the night's heat. Her narrow, divided skirts made a soft whisk, whisk, whisk with her strides. He scratched his 2-week growth of beard irritably. It was even curlier than the hair on his head. It was also hot. For the 100th time, he thought of shaving. "It suits you," Fail said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. Uncomfortably, he shrugged his shoulders, heavy from long hours working at a forge. She did that sometimes, seemed to know what he was thinking. "It itches," he muttered, and wished he had spoken more forcefully. It was his beard. He could shave it off any time he wanted. She studied him, her head tilted to one side. Her bold nose and high cheekbones made it seem a fierce study, a contrast to the soft voice in which she said, "It looks right on you." Perrin sighed and shrugged again. She had not asked him to keep the beard, and she would not. Yet he knew he was going to put off shaving again. He wondered how his friend Matt would handle this situation. Probably with a pinch and a kiss and some remark that made her laugh until he brought her around to his way of thinking. But Perrin knew he did not have Matt's way with the girls. Matt would never find himself sweating behind a beard just because a woman thought he should have hair on his face. Unless maybe the woman was Fail. Perrin suspected that her father must deeply regret her leaving home, and not just because she was his daughter. He was the biggest fur trader in Saldaia, so she claimed, and Perrin could see her getting the price she wanted every time. "Something is troubling you, Fail, and it isn't my beard. What is it?" Her expression became guarded. She looked everywhere but at him, making a contemptuous survey of the room's furnishings. Carvings of leopards and lions, stooping hawks, and hunting scenes decorated everything from the tall wardrobe and bedposts as thick as his leg to the padded bench in front of the cold marble fireplace. Some of the animals had garnet eyes. He had tried to convince the Majira that he wanted a simple room, but she did not seem to understand. Not that she was stupid or slow. The Majira commanded an army of servants greater in numbers than the defenders of the stone. Whoever commanded the stone, whoever held its walls, she saw to the day-to-day matters that let everything function. But she looked at the world through Tyran eyes. Despite his clothes, he must be more than the young countryman he seemed, because commoners were never housed in the stone, save for defenders and servants, of course. Beyond that, he was one of Rand's party, a friend or a follower, or in any case, close to the dragon reborn in some way. To the Majira, that set him on a level with the lord of the land, at the very least, if not a high lord. She had been scandalized enough at putting him in here, without even a sitting room. He thought she might have fainted if he had insisted on an even plainer chamber. If there were such things, short of the servants' quarters, or the defenders. At least nothing here was gilded except the candlesticks. Fail's opinions, though, were not his. "You should have better than this. You deserve it. You can wager your last copper that Matt has better." "Matt likes gaudy things," he said simply. "You do not stand up for yourself." He did not comment. It was not his rooms that made her smell of unease, any more than his beard. After a moment she said, "The Lord Dragon seems to have lost interest in you. All his time is taken by the High Lords now." The itch between his shoulders worsened. He knew what was troubling her now. He tried to make his voice light. The Lord Dragon? You sound like a tyrant. His name is Rand. He's your friend, Perrin Ibarra, not mine. If a man like that has friends. She drew a deep breath and went on in a more moderate tone.
Give you guys another view of the.
I've been thinking about leaving the stone, leaving Tyr. I don't think Moraine would try to stop me. News of Rand has been leaving the city for 2 weeks now. She can't think to keep him secret any longer. He only just stopped another sigh. I don't think she will.
That one over there is.
If anything, I think she considers you a complication.
He's 15.
She will probably give you money to see you on your way. Planting fists on hips, she moved to stare down at him. Is that all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That I want you to stay? The anger in his own voice startled him. He was angry with himself, not her. Angry because he had not seen this coming. Angry because he could not see how to deal with it. He liked being able to think things through. It was easy to hurt people without meaning to when you were hasty. He'd done that now. Her dark eyes were large with shock. He tried to smooth his words. I do want you to stay, Fail. But maybe you should leave. I know you're no coward, but the Dragon Reborn, the Forsaken? Not that anywhere was really safe. Not for long, not now. Yet there were safer places than the stone. For a while, anyway. Not that he was stupid enough to put it to her that way. But she did not appear to care how he put it. Stay? The light illumine me. Anything is better than sitting here like a boulder, but... She knelt gracefully in front of him, resting her hands on his knees. Perrin, I do not like wondering when one of the Forsaken is going to walk around the corner in front of me. And I do not like wondering when the Dragon Reborn is going to kill us all. He did it back in the Breaking, after all. Killed everyone close to him. Rand isn't Lews Therin Kinslayer, Perrin protested. I mean, he is the Dragon Reborn, but he isn't... He wouldn't... He trailed off, not knowing how to finish. Rand was Lews Therin Telamon Reborn. That was what being the Dragon Reborn meant. But did it mean Rand was doomed to Lews Therin's fate? Not just going mad. Any man who channeled had that fate in front of him. And then a rotting death. But killing everyone who cared for him? I had been talking to Bane and Chiad, Perrin. That was no surprise. She spent considerable time with the Aiel women. The friendship made some trouble for her, but she seemed to like the Aiel women as much as she despised the Stone's Tyran noblewomen. But he saw no connection to what they were talking about, and he said so. They say Moraine sometimes asks where you are, or Matt. Don't you see? She would not have to do that if she could watch you with the power. Watch me with the power, he said faintly. He had never even considered that. She cannot. Come with me, Perrin. We can be 20 miles across the river before she misses us. I can't, he said miserably. He tried diverting her with a kiss, but she leaped to her feet and backed away so fast he nearly fell on his face. There was no point going after her. She had her arms crossed beneath her breasts like a barrier. Don't tell me you are that afraid of her. I know she is Aes Sedai, and she has all of you dancing when she twitches the strings. Perhaps she has the Rand so tied he cannot get loose, and the light knows Egwene and Elaine and even Nynaeve don't want to. But you can break her cords if you try. It has nothing to do with Moraine. It's what I have to do. She cut him short. Don't you dare hand me any of that hairy-chested drivel about a man having to do his duty. I know duty as well as you, and you have no duty here. You may be ta'veren, even if I don't see it, but he is the Dragon Reborn, not you. Will you listen? He shouted, glaring, and she jumped. He had never shouted at her before, not like that. She raised her chin and shifted her shoulders, but she did not say anything.
I like the Reds that's in that one, man.
I think I am part of Rand's destiny somehow. Matt, too. I think he can't do what he has to.
Then again, I like the ones that have Reds in them just because it makes, I think it makes it pop more.
How can I walk away if it might mean Rand will fail? Might? There was a hint of demand in her voice, but only a hint. He wondered if he could make himself shout at her more often. Did Moraine tell you this, Perrin? You should know by now to listen closely to what an Aes Sedai says. I worked it out for myself. I think ta'veren are pulled toward each other. Or maybe Rand pulls us, Matt and me both. He's supposed to be the strongest ta'veren since Arthur Hawkwing. Maybe since the Breaking. Matt won't even admit he's ta'veren. But however he tries to get away, he always ends up drawn back to Rand. Loyal says he has never heard of 3 ta'veren, all the same age, and all from the same place. Fael sniffed loudly. Loyal does not know everything. He isn't very old for an Ogier. He's past 90, Perrin said defensively, and she gave him a tight smile. For an Ogier, 90 years was not much older than Perrin, or maybe younger. He did not know much about Ogier. In any case, Loyal had read more books than Perrin had ever seen, or even heard of. Sometimes he thought Loyal had read every book ever printed. And he knows more than you or I do. He believes maybe I have the right of it. And so does Moraine. No, I haven't asked her, but why else does she keep a watch on me? Do you think she wanted me to make her a kitchen knife? She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke, it was in sympathetic tones. Poor Perrin. I left Saldaia to find adventure, and now that I'm in the heart of one, the greatest since the Breaking, all I want to do is go somewhere else. You just want to be a blacksmith. You're going to end up in the stories whether you want it or not. He looked away, though the scent of her still filled his head. He did not think he was likely to have any stories told about him, not unless his secret spread a long way beyond the few who knew already. Fael thought she knew everything about him, but she was wrong. An axe and a hammer leaned against the wall opposite him, each plain and functional, with a haft as long as his forearm. The axe was a wicked half-moon blade balanced by a thick spike, meant for violence. With the hammer he could make things, had made things, at a forge. The hammerhead weighed more than twice as much as the axe blade, but it was the axe that felt heavier by far every time he picked it up. With the axe he scowled, not wanting to think about that. She was right. All he wanted was to be a blacksmith, to go home and see his family again, and work at the smithy. But it was not to be. He knew that. He got to his feet long enough to pick up the hammer, and sat back down. There was something comforting in holding it. Master Luhan always says you can't walk away from what has to be done. He hurried on, realizing that was a little too close to what she had called hairy-chested drivel. He's the blacksmith back home. The man I was apprenticed to. I've told you about him. To his surprise, she did not take the opportunity to point out his near echo. In fact, she said nothing, only looked at him, waiting for something. After a moment, it came to him. Are you leaving then? He asked. She stood up, brushing her skirt. For a long moment, she kept silent, as if deciding on her answer. I do not know, she said finally. This is a fine mess you've put me in. Me? What did I do? Well, if you don't know, I am certainly not going to tell you. Scratching his beard again, he stared at the hammer in his other hand. Matt would probably know exactly what she meant. Or even old Tom Marilyn. The white-haired gleeman claimed no one understood women, but when he came out of his tiny room in the belly of the stone, he soon had half a dozen girls young enough to be his granddaughters, sighing and listening to him play the harp and tell of grand adventure and romance. Fael was the only woman Perrin wanted, but sometimes he felt like a fish trying to understand a bird. He knew she wanted him to ask. He knew that much. She might or might not tell him, but he was supposed to ask. Stubbornly, he kept his mouth shut. This time, he meant to wait her out. Outside in the darkness, a cock crowed. Fael shivered and hugged herself. My nurse used to say that meant a death coming. Not that I believe it, of course. He opened his mouth to agree it was foolishness, though he shivered too, but his head whipped around at a grating sound and a thump. The axe had toppled to the floor. He only had time to frown, wondering what could have made it fall, when it shifted again, untouched, then leaped straight at him. He swung the hammer without thought. Metal ringing on metal drowned Fail's scream. The axe flew across the room, bounced off the far wall, and darted back at him, blade first. He thought every hair on his body was trying to stand on end. As the axe sped by her, Fail lunged forward and grabbed the haft with both hands. It twisted in her grip, slashing toward her wide-eyed face. Barely in time, Perrin leaped up, dropping the hammer to seize the axe, just keeping the half-moon blade from her flesh. He thought he would die if the axe, his axe, harmed her. He jerked it away from her so hard that the heavy spike nearly stabbed him in the chest. It would have been a fair trade to stop the axe from hurting her, but with a sinking feeling he began to think it might not be possible. The weapon thrashed like a thing alive, a thing with a malevolent will. It wanted Perrin. He knew that as if it had shouted at him. But it fought with cunning. When he pulled the axe away from Fail, it used his own movement to hack at him. When he forced it from himself, it tried to reach her, as if it knew that would make him stop pushing. No matter how hard he held the haft, it spun in his hands, threatening with spike or curved blade. Already his hands ached from the effort, and his thick arms strained, muscles tight. Sweat rolled down his face. He was not sure how much longer it would be before the axe fought free of his grip. This was all madness, pure madness, with no time to think. "Get out," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Get out of the room, Fail." Her face was bloodless pale, but she shook her head and wrestled with the axe. "No, I will not leave you. It will kill both of us." She shook her head again. Growling in his throat, he let go of the axe with one hand. His arm quivered with holding the thing one-handed. The twisting haft burned his palm, and thrust Fail away. She yelped as he wrestled her to the door. Ignoring her shouts and her fists pounding at him, he held her against the wall with his shoulder until he could pull the door open and shove her into the hallway. Slamming the door behind her, he put his back against it, sliding the latch home with his hip as he seized the axe with both hands again. The heavy blade, gleaming and sharp, trembled within inches of his face. Laboriously, he pushed it out to arm's length. Fail's muted shouts penetrated the thick door, and he could feel her beating on it, but he was barely conscious of her. His yellow eyes seemed to shine as if they reflected every scrap of light in the room. "Just you and me now," he snarled at the axe. "Blood and ashes, how I hate you." Inside, a part of him came close to hysterical laughter. Rand is the one who's supposed to go mad, and here I am talking to an axe. Rand, burn him. Teeth bared with effort, he forced the axe back a full step from the door. The weapon vibrated, fighting to reach flesh. He could almost taste its thirst for his blood. With a roar, he suddenly pulled the curved blade toward him, threw himself back. Had the axe truly been alive, he was sure he would have heard a cry of triumph as it flashed toward his head. At the last instant, he twisted, driving the axe past himself. With a heavy thunk, the blade buried itself in the door. He felt the life, he could not think what else to call it, go out of the imprisoned weapon. Slowly, he took his hands away. The axe stayed where it was, only steel and wood again. The door seemed a good place to leave it for now, though. He wiped sweat from his face with a shaking hand. Madness. Madness walks wherever Rand is. Abruptly, he realized he could no longer hear Fail's shouts or her pounding. Throwing back the latch, he hastily pulled the door open. A gleaming arc of steel stuck through the thick wood on the outside, shining in the light of wide-spaced lamps along the tapestry-hung hallway. Fail stood there, hands raised, frozen in the act of beating on the door. Eyes wide and wondering, she touched the tip of her nose. "Another inch," she said faintly, and... With a sudden start, she flung herself on him, hugging him fiercely, raining kisses on his neck and beard between incoherent murmurs. Just as quickly, she pushed back, running anxious hands over his chest and arms. "Are you hurt? Are you injured? Did it—" "I'm all right," he told her. "What are you?" "I did not mean to frighten you." She peered up at him. "Truly, you are not hurt in any way?" "Completely unhurt. Her full-armed slap made his head ring like a hammer on anvil. "You great hairy lummox! I thought you were dead!" I was afraid it had killed you. I thought... She cut off as he caught her second slap in mid-swing. Please don't do that again, he said quietly. The smarting imprint of her hand burned on his cheek, and he thought his jaw would ache the rest of the night. He gripped her wrist as gently as he would have a bird, but though she struggled to pull free, his hand did not budge an inch. Compared to swinging a hammer all day at the forge, holding her was no effort at all, even after his fight against the axe. Abruptly, she seemed to decide to ignore his grip and stared him in the eye. Neither dark nor golden eyes blinked. I could have helped you. You had no right. I had every right, he said firmly. You could not have helped. If you had stayed, we'd both be dead. I couldn't have fought, not the way I had to, and keep you safe, too. She opened her mouth, but he raised his voice and went on. I know you hate the word. I'll try my best not to treat you like porcelain, but if you ask me to watch you die, I will tie you like a lamb for market and send you off to Mistress Luhan. She won't stand for any such nonsense. Tonguing a tooth and wondering if it was loose, he almost wished he could see Fail trying to ride roughshod over Alsbet Luhan. The blacksmith's wife kept her husband in line with scarcely more effort than she needed for her house. Even Nynaeve had been careful of her sharp tongue around Mistress Luhan. The tooth still held tight, he decided. Fail laughed suddenly, a low, throaty laugh. You would, too, wouldn't you? Don't think you would not dance with the Dark One if you tried, though. Perrin was so startled he let go of her. He could not see any real difference between what he had just said and what he had said before. But the one had made her blaze up, while this she took fondly. Not that he was certain the threat to kill him was entirely a joke. Fail carried knives hidden about her person, and she knew how to use them. She rubbed her wrist ostentatiously and muttered something under her breath. He caught the words hairy ox and promised himself he would shave every last whisker of that fool beard. He would. Aloud, she said, The axe. That was him, wasn't it? The dragon reborn trying to kill us. It must have been Rand. He emphasized the name. He did not like thinking of Rand the other way. He preferred remembering the Rand he had grown up with in Emmons Field. Not trying to kill us, though. Not him. She gave him a wry smile, more a grimace. If he was not trying, I hope he never does. I don't know what he was doing, but I mean to tell him to stop it, and right now. I don't know why I care for a man who worries so about his own safety, she murmured. He frowned at her quizzically, wondering what she meant, but she only tucked her arm through his. He was still wondering as they started off through the stone. The axe he left where it was. Stuck in the door, it would not harm anyone. Teeth clamped on a long-stemmed pipe, Matt opened his coat a bit more and tried to concentrate on the cards lying face down in front of him, and on the coins spilled in the middle of the table. He had had the bright red coat made to an Andoran pattern, of the best wool, with golden embroidery scrolling around the cuffs and long collar. But day by day, he was reminded how much farther south Tyr lay than Andor. Sweat ran down his face and plastered the shirt to his back. None of his companions around the table appeared to notice the heat at all, despite coats that looked even heavier than his, with fat, swollen sleeves, all padded silks and brocades and satin stripes. Two men in red and gold livery kept the gamblers' silver cups full of wine and proffered shining silver trays of olives and cheeses and nuts. The heat did not seem to affect the servants either, though now and again one of them yawned behind his hand when he thought no one was looking. The night was not young. Matt refrained from lifting his cards to check them again. They would not have changed. 3 rulers, the highest cards in 3 of the 5 suits, were already good enough to win most hands. He would have been more comfortable dicing. There was seldom a deck of cards to be found in the places he usually gambled, where silver changed hands in 50 different dice games. But these young Tyran lordlings would rather wear rags than play at dice. Peasants tossed dice, though they were careful not to say so in his hearing. It was not his temper they feared, but who they thought his friends were. This game called Chop was what they played hour after hour, night after night, using cards hand-painted and lacquered by a man in the city who had been made well-to-do by these fellows and others like them. Only women or horses could draw them away, but neither for long. Still, he had picked up the game quickly enough, and if his luck was not as good as it was with dice, it would do. A fat purse lay beside his cards, and another even fatter rested in his pocket. A fortune, he would have thought once, back at Emmons Field, enough to live the rest of his life in luxury. His ideas of luxury had changed since leaving the Two Rivers. The young lords kept their coin in careless, shining piles, but some old habits he had no intention of changing. In the taverns and inns, it was sometimes necessary to depart quickly, especially if his luck was really with him. When he had enough to keep himself as he wanted, he would leave the stone just as quickly. Before Moraine knew what he was thinking. He would have been days gone by now if he had had his way. It was just that there was gold to be had here. One night at this table could earn him more than a week of dicing in taverns. If only his luck would catch. He put on a small frown and puffed worriedly at his pipe to look unsure whether his cards were good enough to go on with. Two of the young lords had pipes in their teeth, too, but silver-worked with amber bits. In the hot still air, their perfumed tobacco smelled like a fire in a lady's dressing chamber. Not that Matt had ever been in a lady's dressing chamber. An illness that nearly killed him had left his memory as full of holes as the best lace. Yet he was sure he would have remembered that. Not even the dark one would be mean enough to make me forget that. The sea folk ship docked today, Ryman muttered around his pipe. The broad-shouldered young lord's beard was oiled and trimmed to a neat point. This was the latest fashion among the younger lords, and Ryman chased the latest fashion as assiduously as he chased women, which was only a little less diligently than he gambled. He tossed a silver crown onto the pile in the middle of the table for another card. A raker. Fastest ships there are, rakers, so they say. Outrun the wind, they say. I would like to see that. Burn my soul, but I would. He did not bother to look at the card he was dealt. He never did until he had a full 5. The plump, pink-cheeked man between Ryman and Matt gave an amused chuckle. You want to see the ship, Ryman? You mean the girls, do you not? The women. Exotic seafolk beauties with their rings and baubles and swaying walks, eh? He put in the crown and took his card, grimacing when he peeked at it. That meant nothing. Going by his face, Dorian's cards were always low and mismatched. He won more than he lost, though. Well, perhaps my luck will be better with the seafolk girls. The dealer, tall and slender on Matt's other side, with a pointed beard even more darkly luxuriant than Ryman's, laid a finger alongside his nose. You think to be lucky with those, Dorian? The way they keep to themselves, you'll be lucky to catch a whiff of their perfume. He made a wafting gesture, inhaling deeply with a sigh, and the other lordlings laughed, even Dorian. A plain-faced youth named Estine laughed loudest of all, scrubbing a hand through lank hair that kept falling over his forehead.
Just chilling.
Replace his fine yellow coat with drab wool, and he could have passed for a farmer. But instead of the son of a high lord with the richest estates in Tyr, and in his own right the wealthiest man at the table. He had also drunk much more wine than any of the others. Swaying across the man next to him, a foppish fellow named Baran, who always seemed to be looking down his sharp nose, Estine poked the dealer with a none too steady finger. Baran leaned back, twisting his mouth around his pipe stem as if he feared Estine might throw up. That's good, Carlamine, Estine gurgled. You think so too, don't you, Baran? That Dorian won't get a sniff if he wants to try his luck. Take a gamble. You ought to go after the other wretches like Matt here. All those spears and knives. Burn my soul, like asking a lion to dance. Dead silence dropped around the table. Estine laughed on alone, then blinked and scrubbed fingers through his hair again. What's the matter? Did I say something? Oh yes, them. Matt barely stopped to scowl. The fool had to bring up the Aiel. The only worse subject would have been Aes Sedai.
Let me load this again.
They would almost rather have Aiel walking the corridors, staring down any tyrant who got in their way, than even one Aes Sedai. And these men thought they had 4 at least. He fingered an Andarin silver coin from his purse on the table and pushed it into the pot.
This one's an indica, and these 2 are hybrid indica dominant.
Matt lifted it carefully with a thumbnail and did not let himself so much as blink. The ruler of cups, a high lord of Tyr.
They rip pretty good.
The rulers in a deck varied according to the hand where the cards were made, with the nation's own ruler always as ruler of cups, the highest suit. These cards were old. He had already seen new decks with Rand's face or something like it on the ruler of cups, complete with the dragon banner.
They're
Rand, the ruler of Tyr.
2 grammars
too.
Ludicrous
enough to make him want to pinch himself. Rand was
They're pretty good, rechargeable.
A good fellow to have fun with when he was not going all over serious and responsible. Rand, the dragon reborn.
They rip
now.
Pretty good.
That told him he was a stone fool to be sitting there, where Moraine could put her hand on him whenever she wanted, waiting to see what Rand would do next. Maybe Tom Marilyn would go with him, or Perrin. Only Tom seemed to be settling into the stone as if he never meant to leave, and Perrin was not going anywhere unless Fael crooked a finger. Well, Matt was ready to travel alone, if need be. Yet there was silver in the middle of the table and gold in front of the lordlings, and if he was dealt the 5th ruler, there was no hand in shop could beat him. Not that he really needed it. Suddenly he could feel luck tickling his mind. Tingling as it did with the dice, of course. He was already certain no one was going to beat 4 rulers. The Tyrans had been betting wildly all night, the price of 10 farms crossing the table on the quickest hands. But Carloman was staring at the deck of cards in his hand instead of buying his 4th, and Baron was puffing his pipe furiously and stacking coins in front of him as if ready to stuff them into his pockets. Ryman wore a scowl behind his beard, and Dorian was frowning at his nails. Only Esteen appeared unaffected. He grinned uncertainly around the table, perhaps already forgetting what he had said. They usually managed to put some sort of good face on the situation if the Aiel came up, but the hour was late, and the wine had flowed freely. Matt scoured his mind for a way to keep them and their gold from walking away from his cards. One glance at their faces was enough to tell him that simply changing the subject would not be enough. But there was another way. If he made them laugh at the Aiel, is it worth making them laugh at me? Using his pipe stem, he tried to think of something else. Baron picked up a stack of gold in each hand and moved to stick them in his pockets. I might just try these sea folk women, Matt said quickly, taking his stem to gesture with. Odd things happen when you chase Aiel girls. Very odd. Like the game they call Maiden's Kiss. He had their attention, but Baron had not put down the coins, and Carloman still showed no sign of buying a card. Esteen gave a drunken guffaw. Guess you was stealing your ribs, I suppose. Maidens of the Spear, you see? Steal, spear in your ribs. Burn my soul. No one else laughed, but they were listening. Not quite. Matt managed to grin. Burn me, I've told this much, you might as well tell the rest. Rourke said if I wanted to get along with the maidens, I should ask them how to play Maiden's Kiss. He said that was the best way to get to know them. It still sounded like one of the kissing games back home, like Kiss the Daisies. He had never considered the Aiel clan chief a man to play tricks. He would be warier the next time. He made an effort to improve the grin. So I went along to Bane and... Ryman frowned impatiently. None of them knew any Aiel's name but Rourke. And none of them wanted to. Matt dropped the names and hurried on. Went along, dumb as a bull-goose fool, and asked them to show me. He should have suspected something from the wide smiles that had bloomed on their faces, like cats who had been asked to dance with a mouse. Before I knew what was happening, I had a fistful of spears around my neck like a collar. I could have shaved myself with one sneeze. The others around the table exploded in laughter, from Ryman's wheezing to Esteen's wine-soaked bray. Matt left them to it. He could almost feel the spear points again, pricking if he so much as twitched a finger. Bain, laughing all the while, had told him she had never heard of a man actually asking to play Maiden's Kiss. Carloman stroked his beard and spoke into Matt's hesitation. You cannot stop there. Go on. When was this? 2 nights ago, I'll wager, when you didn't come for the game, and no one knew where you were. I was playing stones with Tom Marilyn that night, Matt said quickly. This was days ago. He was glad he could lie with a straight face. They each took a kiss, that's all. If she thought it was a good kiss, they eased up with the spears. If not, they pushed a little harder. To encourage, you might say. That was all. I'll tell you this. I got nicked less than I do shaving. He stuck his pipe back between his teeth. If they wanted to know more, they could go ask to play the game themselves. He almost hoped some of them were fool enough. Bloody Aiel women and their bloody spears. He had not made it to his own bed until daybreak. It would be more than enough for me, Carloman said dryly. A light burned my soul if it would not. He tossed a silver crown into the center of the table and dealt himself another card. Maiden's Kiss. He shook with mirth, and another ripple of laughter ran around the table. Baran bought his 5th card, and Estine fumbled a coin from the heap scattered in front of him, peering at it to see what it was. They would not stop now. Savages, Baran muttered around his pipe. Ignorant savages, that is all they are, burn my soul. Live in caves out in the waste. In caves! No one but a savage could live in the waste. Ryman nodded. At least they serve the Lord Dragon. I would take 100 defenders and clean them out of the stone, if not for that. Baran and Carloman growled fierce agreement. It was no effort for Matt to keep his face straight. He had heard much the same before. Boasting was easy when no one expected you to carry through. 100 defenders? Even if Rand stood aside for some reason, a few hundred Aiel holding the stone could probably keep it against any army Tyr could raise. Not that they seemed to want the stone, really. Matt suspected they were only there because Rand was. He did not think any of these lordlings had figured that out. They tried to ignore the Aiel as much as possible, but he doubted it would make them feel any better. Matt, Estine fanned his cards out in one hand, rearranging them as if he could not decide what order they were meant to go in. Matt, you will speak to the Lord Dragon, won't you? About what? Matt asked cautiously. Too many of these tyrants knew he and Rand had grown up together to suit him, and they seemed to think he was arm in arm with Rand whenever he was out of their sight. None of them would have gone near his own brother if he could channel. He did not know why they thought him a bigger fool. Didn't I say? The plain-faced man squinted at his cards and scratched his head, then brightened. Oh, yes. His proclamation, Matt. The Lord Dragon's. His last one. Where he said commoners had the right to call lords before a magistrate. Who ever heard of a lord being summoned to a magistrate? And for peasants! Matt's hand tightened on his purse until the coins inside grated together. It would be a shame, he said quietly, if you were tried and judged just for having your way with a fisherman's daughter, whatever she wanted, or for having some farmer beaten for splashing mud on your cloak. The others shifted uneasily, catching his mood, but Estine nodded, head bobbing so it seemed about to fall off. Exactly. Though it wouldn't come to that, of course. A lord being tried before a magistrate? Of course not. Not really. He laughed drunkenly at his cards. No fishermen's daughters. Smell of fish, you see. However you have them washed. A plump farm girl is best. Matt told himself he was there to gamble. He told himself to ignore the fool's blather, reminded himself of how much gold he could take out of Estine's purse. His tongue did not listen, though. Who knows what it might come to? Hangings, maybe. And Dorian gave him a sidelong look, guarded and uneasy. Do we have to talk about commoners, Estine? What about old Astral's daughters? Have you decided which you'll marry yet? What? Oh, I'll flip a coin, I suppose. Estine frowned at his cards, shifted one, and frowned again. Medora has 2 or 3 pretty maids. Perhaps Medora. Matt took a long drink from his silver wine cup to keep from hitting the man in his farmer's face. He was still on his first cup. The two servants had given up trying to add more. If he hit Esteen, none of them would lift a hand to stop him. Not even Esteen. Because he was the Lord Dragon's friend. He wished he was in a tavern somewhere out in the city, where some dockman might question his luck, and only a quick tongue or quick feet or quick hands would see him leave with a whole skin. Now that was a fool thought. The Dorian glanced at Matt again, measuring his mood. I heard a rumor today. I heard the Lord Dragon is taking us to war with Ilion. Matt gagged on his wine. War, he sputtered. War, Ryman agreed happily around his pipe stem. Are you certain? Colomine said. And Baron added, I've heard no rumors. I heard it just today, from 3 or 4 tongues. The Dorian seemed to be absorbed in his cards. Who can say how true it is? It must be true, Ryman said. With the Lord Dragon to lead us, holding Kalendor will not even have to fight. He will scatter their armies, and we will march straight into Ilion. Too bad, in a way. Burn my soul if it isn't. I would like a chance to match swords with the Ilioners. You'll get no chance with the Lord Dragon leading, Baron said. They will fall on their knees as soon as they see the dragon banner. And if they do not, Carloman added with a laugh, the Lord Dragon will blast them with lightning where they stand. Ilion first, Ryman said. And then we'll conquer the world for the Lord Dragon. You tell him I said so, Matt. The whole world. Matt shook his head. A month gone, they would have been horrified by even the idea of a man who could channel, a man doomed to go mad and die horribly. Now they were ready to follow Rand into battle and trust his power to win for them. Trust the power, though it was not likely they would put it that way. Yet he supposed they had to find something to hang on to. The invincible stone was in the hands of the Aiel. The dragon reborn was in his chambers 100 feet above their heads, and Kalendor was with him. 3,000 years of Tyran belief and history lay in ruins, and the world had been turned on its head. He wondered whether he had handled it any better. His own world had gone all askew in little more than a year. He rolled a gold Tyran crown across the backs of his fingers. However well he had done, he would not go back. When will we march, Matt? Baron asked. I don't know, he said slowly. I don't think Rand would start a war. Unless he had gone mad already. That hardly bore thinking about. The others looked as if he had assured them the sun would not come up tomorrow. We are all loyal to the Lord Dragon, of course. Dorian frowned at his cards. Out in the countryside, though, I hear that some of the High Lords, a few, have been trying to raise an army to take back the stone. Suddenly no one was looking at Matt, though Esteen still seemed to be trying to make out his cards. When the Lord Dragon takes us to war, of course, they will all melt away. In any case, we are loyal, here in the stone. The High Lords, too, I am certain. It is only the few out in the countryside. Their loyalty would not outlast their fear of the Dragon Reborn. For a moment, Matt felt as though he were planning to abandon Rand in a pit of vipers. Then he remembered what Rand was. It was more like abandoning a weasel in a henyard. Rand had been a friend. The Dragon Reborn, though. Who could be a friend to the Dragon Reborn? I am not abandoning anybody. He could probably pull the stone down on their heads if he wanted to. On my head, too. He told himself again that it was time to be gone. No fishermen's daughters, Esteen mumbled. You will speak to the Lord Dragon. It is your turn, Matt, Carloman said anxiously. He looked half afraid, though what he feared, that Esteen would anger Matt again, or that the talk might go back to loyalty, was impossible to say. Will you buy the 5th card or stack? Matt realized he had not been paying attention. Everyone but himself and Carloman had 5 cards, though Ryman had neatly stacked his face down beside the pot to show that he was out. Matt hesitated, pretending to think, then sighed and tossed another coin toward the pile. As the silver crown bounced end over end, he suddenly felt luck grow from trickles to a flood. Every ping of silver against wooden tabletop rang clear in his head. He could have called face or sigil and known how the coin would land on any bounce, just as he knew what his next card would be before Carloman laid it in front of him. Sliding his cards together on the table, he fanned them in one hand. The ruler of flames stared at him alongside the other four. The Amarylline seat, balancing a flame on her palm, though she looked nothing like Swan Sanche. However the Tyrants felt about Aes Sedai, they acknowledged the power of Tar-Valon, even if flames was the lowest suit. What were the odds of being dealt all five? His luck was best with random things like dice, but perhaps a little more was beginning to rub off on cards. "Well, I burn my bones to ash if it is not so," he muttered. Or that was what he meant to say. "There!" Esteen all but shouted. "You cannot deny it this time. That is the old tongue. Something about burning and bones." He grinned around the table. "My tutor would be proud.
My dog's
Gotta
just
send him a
laid out
gift.
all the way across the
If I
bed.
can find out where he
Your
went."
side. Your
Nobles
side.
were supposed to be able to speak the old tongue, though in reality,
Go your
few knew
side,
more than
boy.
Esteen seemed to. The young lords set to arguing over exactly what Matt had said. They seemed to think it had been a comment on the heat.
Not yet.
Goosebumps pebbled Matt's skin as he tried to recall the words that had just come out of his mouth. A string of gibberish, yet it almost seemed he should understand. "Burn Moraine. If she'd left me alone, I wouldn't have holes in my memory big enough for a wagon and team. And I wouldn't be spouting whatever it bloody is." He would also be milking his father's cows instead of walking the world with a pocket full of gold, but he managed to ignore that part of it. "Are you here to gamble," he said harshly, "or babble like old women over their knitting?" "To gamble," Baran said curtly. 3 crowns, gold." He tossed the coins onto the pot. "And 3 more besides," Esteen hiccuped and added 6 golden crowns to the pile. Suppressing a grin, Matt forgot about the old tongue. It was easy enough. He did not want to think about it. Besides, if they were starting this strongly, he might win enough on this hand to leave in the morning. And if he's crazy enough to start a war, I'll leave if I have to walk. Outside in the darkness, a cock crowed. Matt shifted uneasily and told himself not to be foolish. No one was going to die. His eyes dropped to his cards and blinked. The Amarylline's hand had been replaced by a knife. While he was telling himself he was tired and seeing things, she plunged the tiny blade into the back of his hand. With a hoarse yell, he flung the cards away and hurled himself backward, overturning his chair, kicking the table with both feet as he fell. The air seemed to thicken like honey. Everything moved as if time had slowed, but at the same time, everything seemed to happen at once. Other cries echoed his, hollow shouts reverberating inside a cavern. He and the chair drifted back and down. The table floated upward. The ruler of flames hung in the air, growing larger, staring at him with a cruel smile. Now close to life size, she started to step out of the card. She was still a painted shape with no depth, but she reached for him with her blade, red with his blood, as if it had already been driven into his heart. Beside her, the ruler of cups began to grow, the tyrant High Lord drawing his sword. Matt floated, yet somehow he managed to reach the dagger in his left sleeve and hurl it in the same motion, straight for the Amarylline's heart. If this thing had a heart. The second knife came into his left hand smoothly and left more smoothly. The 2 blades drifted through the air like thistledown. He wanted to scream, but that first yell of shock and outrage still filled his mouth. The ruler of rods was expanding beside the first 2 cards. The Queen of Asgard wielding the rod like a bludgeon, her red gold hair framing a madwoman's snarl. He was still falling, still yelling that drawn-out yell. The Amarylline was free of his the High Lord striding up with his sword. The flat shapes moved almost as slowly as he. Almost. He had proof the steel in their hands could cut, and no doubt the rod could crack a skull. His skull. His thrown daggers moved as if sinking in jelly. He was sure the cock had crowed for him. Whatever his father said, the omen had been real. But he would not give up and die. Somehow he had 2 more daggers out from under his coat, one in either hand. Struggling to twist in midair to get his feet under him, he threw one knife at the golden-haired figure with the bludgeon. The other he held on to as he tried to turn himself to land ready to face. The world lurched back into normal motion, and he landed awkwardly on his side, hard enough to drive the wind out of him. Desperately, he struggled to his feet, drawing another knife from under his coat. You could not carry too many, Tom claimed. Neither was needed. For a moment, he thought cards and figures had vanished, or maybe he had imagined it all. Maybe he was the one going mad. Then he saw the cards, back to ordinary size, pinned to one of the dark wood panels by his still quivering knives. He took a deep, ragged breath. The table lay on its side, coins still spinning across the floor where lordlings and servants crouched among scattered cards. They gaped at Matt and his knives, those in his hands and those in the wall, with equally wide eyes. Estine snatched a silver pitcher that had somehow escaped being overturned and began pouring wine down his throat, the excess spilling over his chin and down his chest. "Just because you do not have the cards to win," Dorian said hoarsely, "there is no need to—" He cut off with a shudder. "You saw it too." Matt slipped the knives back into their sheaths. A thin trickle of blood ran down the back of his hand from the tiny wound. "Don't pretend you went blind." "I saw nothing," Ryman said woodenly. "Nothing." He began crawling across the floor, gathering up gold and silver, concentrating on the coins as if they were the most important thing in the world. The others were doing the same, except Estine, who scrambled about, checking the fallen pitchers for any that still held wine. One of the servants had his face hidden in his hands. The other, eyes closed, was apparently praying in a low, breathless whine. With a muttered oath, Matt strode to where his knives pinned the 3 cards to the panel. They were only playing cards again, just stiff paper with the clear lacquer cracked. But the figure of the Amerlin still held a dagger instead of a flame. He tasted blood and realized he was sucking the cut in the back of his hand. Hastily, he wrenched his knives free, tearing each card in half before tucking the blade away. After a moment, he hunted through the cards littering the floor until he found the rulers of coins and wins, and tore them across too. He felt a little foolish. It was over and done with. The cards were just cards again. But he could not help it. None of the young lords crawling about on hands and knees tried to stop him. They scrambled out of his way, not even glancing at him. There would be no more gambling tonight, and maybe not for some nights to come. At least, not with him. Whatever had happened, it had been aimed at him, clearly. Even more clearly, it had to have been done with the one power. They wanted no part of that. "Burn you, Rand," he muttered under his breath. "If you have to go mad, leave me out of it." His pipe lay in 2 pieces, the stem bitten through cleanly. Angrily, he grabbed his purse from the floor and stalked out of the room. In his darkened bedchamber, Rand tossed uneasily on a bed wide enough for 5 people. He was dreaming. Through a shadowy forest, Moraine was prodding him with a sharp stick toward where the Amerlin seat waited, sitting on a stump with a rope halter for his neck in her hands. Dim shapes moved half-seen through the trees, stalking, hunting him. Here a dagger blade flashed in the failing light. Over there he caught a glimpse of ropes, ready for binding. Slender and not as tall as his shoulder, Moraine wore an expression he had never seen on her face. Fear. Sweating, she prodded harder, trying to hurry him to the Amerlin's halter. Dark friends and the Forsaken in the shadows, the White Towers leash ahead, and Moraine behind. Dodging Moraine's steps, he fled. "It is too late for that," she called after him. But he had to get back. Back. Muttering, he thrashed on the bed, then was still, breathing more easily for a moment. He was in the waterwood back home, sunlight slanting through the trees to sparkle in the pond in front of him. There was green moss on the rocks at this end of the pond, and 30 paces away at the other end, a small arc of wildflowers. This was where, as a child, he had learned to swim. "You should have a swim now." He spun around with a start. Min stood there, grinning at him in her boy's coat and breeches, and next to her, Elaine, with her red golden curls and a green silk gown fit for her mother's palace. It was Min who had spoken, but Elaine added, "The water looks inviting, Rand. No one will bother us here." "I don't know," he began slowly. Min cut him off by twining her fingers behind his neck and pulling herself up on tiptoe to kiss him. She repeated Elaine's words in a soft murmur. "No one will bother us here." She stepped back and doffed her coat, then attacked the laces of her shirt. Rand stared, the more so when he realized Elaine's gown was lying on the mossy ground. The daughter heir was bending, arms crossed, gathering up the hem of her shift. "What are you doing?" he demanded in a strangled voice. "Getting ready to go swimming with you," Min replied. Elaine flashed him a smile and hoisted the shift over her head. He turned his back hastily, though half wanting not to, and found himself staring at Egwene, her big dark eyes looking back at him sadly. Without a word, she turned and vanished into the trees. "Wait!" he shouted after her. I can explain." He began to run. He had to find her. But as he reached the edge of trees, Min's voice stopped him. "Don't go, Rand." She and Elaine were in the water already, only their heads showing as they swam lazily in the middle of the pond. "Come back," Elaine called, lifting a slim arm to beckon. "Do you not deserve what you want for a change?" He shifted his feet, wanting to move, but unable to decide which way. What he wanted. The words sounded strange. What did he want? He raised a hand to his face to wipe away what felt like sweat. Festering flesh almost obliterated the heron branded on his palm. White bones showed through red-edged gaps. With a jerk, he came awake, lying there shivering in the dark heat. Sweat soaked his small clothes and the linen sheets beneath his back. His side burned where an old wound had never healed properly. He traced the rough scar, a circle nearly an inch across, still tender after all this time. Even Moraine's Aes Sedai healing could not mend it completely. But I'm not rotting yet. And I'm not mad either. Not yet. Not yet. That said it all. He wanted to laugh and wondered if that meant he was a little mad already. Dreaming about Min and Elaine. Dreaming of them like that. Well, it was not madness, but it was surely foolishness. Neither one of them had ever looked at him in that way when he was awake. Egwene he had been all but promised to since they were both children. The betrothal words had never been spoken in front of the women's circle, but everyone in and around Emmons Field knew they would marry one day. That one day would never come, of course. Not now. Not with the fate that lay ahead of a man who channeled. Egwene must have realized that, too. She must have. She was all wrapped up in becoming Aes Sedai. Still, women were odd. She might think she could be an Aes Sedai and marry him anyway, channeling or no channeling. How could he tell her that he did not want to marry her anymore? That he loved her like a sister? But there would not be any need to tell her, he was sure. He could hide behind what he was. She had to understand that. What man could ask a woman to marry him when he knew he had only a few years, if he was lucky, before he went insane, before he began to rot alive? He shivered despite the heat. I need sleep. The High Lords would be back in the morning, maneuvering for his favor. For the Dragon Reborn's favor. Maybe I won't dream this time. He started to roll over, searching for a dry place on the sheets, and froze, listening to small rustlings in the darkness. He was not alone. The sword that is not a sword lay across the room, beyond his reach, on a throne-like stand the High Lords had given him, no doubt in the hopes he would keep Kalendor out of their sight. Someone wanting to steal Kalendor? A second thought came, or to kill the Dragon Reborn. He did not need Tom's whispered warnings to know that the High Lord's professions of undying loyalty were only words of necessity. He emptied himself of thought and emotions, assuming the void. That much came without effort. Floating in the cold emptiness within himself, thought and emotion outside, he reached for the true source. This time he touched it easily, which was not always the case. Sidene filled him like a torrent of white heat and light, exalting him with life, sickening him with the foulness of the Dark One's taint, like a skim of sewage floating on pure, sweet water. The torrent threatened to wash him away, burn him up, engulf him. Fighting the flood, he mastered it by bare effort of will and rolled from the bed, channeling the power as he landed on his feet in the stance to begin the sword form called Apple Blossoms in the Wind. His enemies could not be many, or they would have made more noise. The gently named form was meant for use against more than one opponent. As his feet hit the carpet, a sword was in his hands, with a long hilt and a slightly curved blade, sharp on only one edge. It looked to have been wrought from flame, yet it did not feel even warm. The figure of a heron stood black against the yellow red of the blade. In the same instant, every candle and gilded lamp burst alight, small mirrors behind them swelling the illumination. Larger mirrors on the walls, and 2 standing mirrors reflected it further, until he could have read comfortably anywhere in the large room. Collindor sat undisturbed, a sword seemingly of glass, hilt and blade, on a stand as tall as a man and just as wide, the wood ornately carved and gilded and set with precious stones. The furnishings, too, were all gilded and begemmed, bed and chairs and benches, wardrobes and chests and washstand. The pitcher and bowl were golden seafolk porcelain, as thin as leaves. The broad Taraban carpet, in scrolls of scarlet and gold and blue, could have fed an entire village for months. Almost every flat surface held more delicate seafolk porcelain, or else goblets and bowls and ornaments of gold worked with silver, and silver chased with gold. On the broad marble mantel over the fireplace, 2 silver wolves with ruby eyes tried to pull down a golden stag a good 3 feet tall. Draperies of scarlet silk embroidered with eagles and thread of gold hung at the narrow windows, stirring slightly in a failing wind. Books lay wherever there was room, leather-bound, wood-bound, some tattered and still dusty from the deepest shelves of the Stone's library. Now, where he had thought to see assassins or thieves, one beautiful young woman stood hesitant and surprised in the middle of the carpet, black hair falling in shining waves to her shoulders. Her thin white silk robe emphasized more than it hid. Berelaine, ruler of the city-state of Mayenne, was the last person he had expected. After one wide-eyed start, she made a deep, graceful curtsy that drew her garments tight. "I am unarmed, my Lord Dragon. I submit myself to your search, if you doubt me." Her smile suddenly made him uncomfortably aware that he wore nothing but his small clothes. "I'll be burned if she makes me scramble around trying to cover myself." The thought floated beyond the void. I didn't ask her to walk in on me, to sneak in. Anger and embarrassment drifted along the borders of emptiness, too, but his face reddened all the same. Dimly he was aware of it, aware of the knowledge deepening the flush in his cheeks. So coldly calm within the void, outside he could feel each individual droplet of sweat sliding down his chest and back. It took a real effort of stubborn will to stand there under her eyes. Search her? Oh, line help me. Relaxing his stance, he let the sword vanish, but held the narrow flow connecting him to Saidin. It was like drinking from a hole in a dike when the whole long mound of earth wanted to give way, the water sweet as honeyed wine, and sickening as a rivulet through a midden. He did not know much of this woman, except that she walked through the stone as if it were her palace in Mayenne. Tom said the first of Mayenne asked questions constantly, of everyone. Questions about Rand. Which might have been natural, given what he was, but they made him no easier in his mind. And she had not returned to Mayenne. That was not natural. She had been held captive in all but name for months until his arrival, cut off from her throne and the ruling of her small nation. Most people would have taken the first opportunity to get away from a man who could channel. "What are you doing here?" He knew he sounded harsh and did not care. "There were Aiel guarding that door when I went to sleep. How did you come past them?" Berelaine's lips curved up a trifle more. To Rand, it seemed the room had gotten suddenly even hotter. "They passed me through immediately when I said I had been summoned by the Lord Dragon." "Summoned? I didn't summon anybody." "Stop this," he told himself. "She's a queen, or the next thing to it. You know as much about the ways of queens as you do about flying." He tried to make himself be civil. only he did not know what to call the 1st of Mayan. My lady, that would have to do. Why would I summon you at this time of night? She gave a low, rich laugh, deep in her throat. Even wrapped in emotionless emptiness, it seemed to tickle his skin, make the hairs stir on his arms and legs. Suddenly he took in her clinging garb as if for the first time, and felt himself go red all over again. She can't mean, can she? Why, I've never said 2 words to her before. Perhaps I wish to talk, my Lord Dragon. She let the pale robe fall to the floor, revealing an even thinner white silk garment he could only call a nightgown. It left her smooth shoulders completely bare and exposed a considerable expanse of pale bosom. He found himself wondering distantly what held it up. It was difficult not to stare. You are a long way from your home, like me. The nights especially seem lonely. Tomorrow, I will be happy to talk with you. But during the day, people surround you. Petitioners, high lords. I yield. She gave a shiver. He told himself he really ought to look away, but he could as easily have stopped breathing. He had never before been so aware of his own reactions when wrapped in the void. The Aiel frighten me, and I do not like Tyrant lords of any sort. About the Tyrants, he could believe her, but he did not think anything frightened this woman. Burn me, she's in a strange man's bedchamber in the middle of the night, only half-dressed, and I'm the one who's jumpy as a cat in a dog run, void or no. It was time to put an end to things before they went too far. It would be better if you returned to your own bedchamber, my lady. Part of him wanted to tell her to put on a cloak, too. A thick cloak. Part of him did. It is really too late for talking. Tomorrow, in daylight. She gave him a slanted, quizzical look. Have you absorbed stuffy tyrant ways already, my Lord Dragon? Or is this reticence something from your 2 rivers? We are not so formal in Mayan. My lady, he tried to sound formal. If she did not like formality, that was what he wanted. I am promised to Egwene Alvear, my lady. You mean the Aes Sedai, my Lord Dragon? If she really is Aes Sedai, she is quite young, perhaps too young, to wear the ring and the shawl. Berylane spoke as if Egwene were a child, though she herself could not be more than a year older than Rand, if that. And he had only a little over 2 years on Egwene. My Lord Dragon, I do not mean to come between you. Marry her if she is Green Ajah. I would never aspire to wed the Dragon Reborn himself. Forgive me if I overstep myself, but I told you we are not so formal in Mayan. May I call you Rand? Rand surprised himself by sighing regretfully. There had been a glint in her eye, a slight shift of expression, gone quickly when she mentioned marrying the Dragon Reborn. If she had not considered it before, she had now. The Dragon Reborn, not Rand al'Thor. The man of prophecy, not the shepherd from the 2 rivers. He was not shocked, exactly. Some girls back home mooned over whoever proved himself fastest or strongest in the games at Beltane and Sunday. And now and again a woman set her eyes on the man with the richest fields or the largest flocks. It would have been good to think she wanted Rand al'Thor. It is time for you to go, my lady, he said quietly. She stepped closer. I can feel your eyes on me, Rand. Her voice was smoky heat. I am no village girl tied to her mother's apron. And I know you want... Do you think I'm made of stone, woman? She jumped at his roar, but the next instant she was crossing the carpet, reaching for him, her eyes dark pools that could pull a man into their depths. Your arms look as strong as stone. If you think you must be harsh with me, then be harsh. So long as you hold me. Her hands touched his face. Sparks seemed to leap from her fingers. Without thinking, he channeled the flows still linked to him, and suddenly she was staggering back, eyes wide with startlement, as if a wall of air pushed her. It was air, he realized. He did things without knowing what he was doing more often than he did know. At least once done, he could usually remember how to do them again. The unseen moving wall scraped ripples along the carpet, sweeping along Verlaine's discarded robe, a boot he had tossed aside undressing, and a red leather footstool supporting an open volume of Eben Banda's The History of the Stone of Tyr. Pushing them along as it forced her almost to the wall, fenced her in. Safely away from him, he tied off the flow. That was all he could think to call what he did, and no longer needed to maintain the shield himself. For a moment he studied what he had done until he was sure he could repeat it. It looked useful, especially the tying off. Dark eyes still wide, Verlaine felt along the confines of her invisible prison with trembling hands. Her face was almost as white as her skimpy silk shift. Footstool, boot, and book lay at her feet, jumbled with the robe. "Much as I regret it," he told her, "we will not speak again, except in public, milady." He really did regret it. Whatever her motives, she was beautiful. Burn me, I am a fool. He was not sure how he meant that, for thinking of her beauty or for sending her away. In fact, it is best you arrange your journey back to Mayenne as soon as possible. I promise you that Tyr will not trouble Mayenne again. You have my word. It was a promise good only for his lifetime, perhaps only as long as he stood in the stone. But he had to offer her something, a bandage for her wounded pride, a gift to take her mind off being afraid. But her fear was already under control, on the outside at least. Honesty and openness filled her face, all efforts at allure gone. "Forgive me. I have handled this badly. I did not mean to offend. In my country, a woman may speak her mind to a man freely, or he to her. Rand, you must know that you are a handsome man, tall and strong. I would be the one made of stone if I did not see it and admire. Please do not send me away from you. I will beg it if you wish." She knelt smoothly, like a dance. Her expression still said she was being open, confessing everything. But on the other hand, in kneeling, she had managed to tug her already precarious gown down until it looked in real danger of falling off. "Please, Rand." Even sheltered in emptiness as he was, he gaped at her, and it had nothing to do with her beauty or her near undress. Well, only partly. If the defenders of the stone had been half as determined as this woman, half as steadfast in purpose, 10,000 Aiel could never have taken the stone. "I am flattered, my lady," he said diplomatically. "Believe me, I am. But it would not be fair to you. I cannot give you what you deserve. And let her make of that what she will." Outside in the darkness, a cock crowed. To Rand's surprise, Verlaine suddenly stared past him, eyes as big as teacups. Her mouth dropped open, and her slim throat corded with a scream that would not come. He spun, the yellow-red sword flashing back into his hands. Across the room, one of the stand mirrors threw his reflection back at him. A tall young man with reddish hair and gray eyes, wearing only white linen small clothes, and holding a sword carved from fire. The reflection stepped out onto the carpet, raising its sword. I have gone mad. Thought drifted on the borders of the void. No, she saw it. It's real. Movement to his left caught the corner of his eye. He twisted before he could think, sword sweeping up in the moon rises over water. The blade slashed through the shape, his shape, climbing out of a mirror on the wall. The form wavered, broke up like dust motes floating on air, vanished. Rand's reflection appeared in the mirror again, but even as it did, it put hands on the mirror frame. He was aware of movement in mirrors all around the room. Desperately, he stabbed at the mirror. Silvered glass shattered, yet it seemed that the image shattered first. He thought he heard a distant scream inside his head, his own scream screaming, fading. Even as shards of mirror fell, he lashed out with the one power. Every mirror in the room exploded silently, fountaining glass across the carpet. The dying scream in his head echoed again and again, sending shivers down his back. It was his voice, He could hardly believe it was not himself who made the sounds. He spun back to face the one that had gotten out, just in time to meet its attack, unfolding the fan to counter stones falling down the mountain. The figure leaped back, and suddenly Rand realized it was not alone. As quickly as he had smashed the mirrors, 2 more reflections had escaped. Now they stood facing him, 3 duplicates of himself, down to the puckered round scar on his side, all staring at him, faces twisted with hatred and contempt, with a strange hunger. Only their eyes seemed empty, lifeless. Before he could take a breath, they rushed at him. Rand stepped sideways, pieces of broken mirror slicing his feet, ever sideways, from stance to stance and form to form, trying to face only one at a time. He used everything Lan, Moraine's warder, had taught him of the sword in their daily practice. Had the 3 fought together, had they supported one another, he would have died in the first minute. But each fought him alone, as if the others did not exist. Even so, he could not stop their blades entirely. In minutes, blood ran down the side of his face, his chest, his arms. The old wound tore open, adding its flow to stain his small clothes with red. They had his skill as well as his face, and they were 3 to his 1. Chairs and tables toppled. Priceless seafolk porcelain shattered on the carpet. He felt his strength ebbing. None of his cuts was major by itself, except the old wound, but altogether... He never thought of calling for help from the Aiel outside his door. The thick walls would stifle even a death scream. Whatever was done, he must do alone. He fought wrapped in the cold emotionlessness of the void, but fear scraped at its boundaries like wind-lashed branches scratching a window in the night. His blade slipped past its opponent to slash across a face just below the eyes. He could not help wincing. It was his face, its owner sliding back just far enough to avoid a killing cut. Blood welled from the gash, veiling mouth and chin in dark crimson, but the ruined face did not change expression, and its empty eyes never flickered. It wanted him dead the way a starving man wanted food. Could anything kill them? All 3 bled from the wounds he had managed to inflict, but bleeding did not seem to slow them, as he knew it was slowing him. They tried to avoid his sword, but did not appear to realize they had been hurt. If they have been, he thought grimly. Light, if they bleed, they can be hurt. They must. He needed a respite, a moment to catch his breath, to gather himself. Suddenly he leaped from them onto the bed, rolling across its width. He sensed rather than saw blades slashing the sheets, barely missing his flesh. Staggering, he landed on his feet, caught at a small table to steady himself. The shining gold-worked silver bowl on the table wobbled. One of his doubles had climbed onto the torn bed, kicking goose feathers as it padded across warily, sword at the ready. The other 2 came slowly around, still ignoring each other, intent only on him. Their eyes glistened like glass. Rand shuddered as pain stabbed his hand on the table. An image of himself, no more than 6 inches tall, drew back its small sword. Instinctively, he grabbed the figure before it could stab again. It writhed in his grip, baring teeth at him. He became aware of small movements all around the room, of small reflections by the score stepping out of polished silver. His hand began to numb, to grow cold, as if the thing were sucking the warmth out of his flesh. The heat of Saidin swelled inside him. A rushing filled his head, and the heat flowed into his icy hand. Suddenly, the small figure burst like a bubble, and he felt something flow into him from the bursting, some little portion of his lost strength. He jerked as tiny jolts of vitality seemed to pelt him. When he raised his head, wondering why he was not dead, the small reflections he had half glimpsed were gone. The 3 larger stood wavering, as if his gain in strength had been their loss. Yet as he looked up, they steadied on their feet and came on, if more cautiously. He backed away, thinking furiously, sword threatening first one and then another. If he continued to fight them as he had been, they would kill him sooner or later. He knew that as surely as he knew he was bleeding, but something linked the reflections. Absorbing the small one, the far-off thought made him queasy, but that was what it had been. It not only brought the others with it, it had also affected the bigger, for a moment at least. If he could do the same to one of them, it might destroy all 3. Even thinking of absorbing them made him vaguely aware of wanting to empty his stomach, but he did not know another way. I don't know this way, How did I do it? Light, what did I do? He had to grapple with one of them, to touch it at least. He was somehow sure of that. But if he tried to get that close, he would have 3 blades through him and as many heartbeats. Reflections. How much are they still reflections? Hoping he was not being a fool, if he was, he might well be a dead one, he let his sword vanish. He was ready to bring it back on the instant, but when his carved fire blade winked out of existence, the others did too. For a moment, confusion painted 3 copies of his face, one a bloody ruin. But before he could seize one of them, they leaped for him, all 4 crashing to the floor in a tangle of grappling limbs, rolling across the glass-littered carpet. Cold soaked into Rand. Numbness crept along his limbs, through his bones, until he barely felt the shards of mirror, the slivers of porcelain grinding into his flesh. Something close to panic flickered across the emptiness surrounding him. He might have made a fatal mistake. They were larger than the one he had absorbed, and they were drawing more heat from him. And not only heat. As he grew colder, the glassy gray eyes staring into his took on life. With chill certainty, he knew that if he died, that would not end the struggle. The 3 would turn on one another until only one remained, and that one would have his life, his memories, would be him. Stubbornly he fought, struggling harder the weaker he became. He pulled on Saidin, trying to fill himself with its heat. Even the stomach-turning taint was welcome, for the more of it he felt, the more Saidin suffused him. If his stomach could rebel, then he was still alive, and if he lived, he could fight. But how? How? What did I do before? Saidin raged through him till it seemed that if he survived his attackers, he would only be consumed by the power. How did I do it? All he could do was pull at Saidin, and try, reach, strain. One of the 3 vanished. Rand felt it slide into him. It was as if he had fallen from a height, flat onto stony ground. And then the other 2 together. The impact flung him onto his back, where he lay staring up at the worked plaster ceiling with its gilded bosses, lay luxuriating in the fact that he was still breathing. The power still swelled in every crevice of his being. He wanted to spew up every meal he had ever eaten. He felt so alive that, by comparison, life not soaked in Saidin was living a shadow. He could smell the beeswax of the candles and the oil in the lamps. He could feel every fiber of the carpet against his back. He could feel every gash in his flesh, every cut, every nick, every bruise. But he held on to Saidin. One of the Forsaken had tried to kill him. Or all of them had. It must have been that. Unless the Dark One was free already, in which case he did not think he would have faced anything as easy or as simple as this. So he held his link to the true source. Unless I did it myself. Can I hate what I am enough to try to kill myself, without even knowing it? Light, I have to learn to control it. I have to. Painfully, he pushed himself up. Leaving bloody footprints on the carpet, he limped to the stand where Kalendor rested. Blood from hundreds of cuts covered him. He lifted the sword, and its glassy length glowed with the power flowing into it. The sword that is not a sword. That blade, apparently glass, would cut as well as the finest steel. Yet Kalendor truly was not a sword, but instead a remnant of the Age of Legends. A Sa'angreal. With the aid of one of the relatively few Angreal, known to have survived the War of the Shadow and breaking of the world, it was possible to channel flows of the one power that would have burned the channeler to ash without it. With one of the even rarer Sa'angreal, the flows could be increased as much over those possible with an Angreal as an Angreal increased them over channeling naked. And Kalendor, usable only by a man, linked to the Dragon Reborn through 3,000 years of legend and prophecy, was one of the most powerful Sa'angreal ever made. Holding Kalendor in his hands, he could level a city's walls at a blow. Holding Kalendor in his hands, he could face even one of the Forsaken. It was them. It must have been. Abruptly, he realized he had not heard a sound from Berlane. Half fearing to see her dead, he turned. Still kneeling, she flinched. She had donned her robe again and hugged it around her like steel armor or stone walls. Face as white as snow, she licked her lips. Which one She swallowed and began again. Which one? She could not finish it. I am the only one there is, he said gently. The one you are treating as if we were betrothed. He meant it to soothe her, perhaps make her smile. Surely a woman as strong as she had shown herself to be could smile, even facing a blood-drenched man. But she bent forward, pressing her face to the floor. I apologize humbly for having most grievously offended you, Lord Dragon. Her breathy voice did sound humble and frightened, completely unlike herself. I beg you to forget my offense and forgive. I will not bother you again. I swear it, my Lord Dragon. On my mother's name and under the light, I swear it. He loosed the knotted flow. The invisible wall confining her became a momentary stir that ruffled her robe. There is nothing to forgive, he said wearily. He felt very tired. Go as you wish. She straightened hesitantly, stretched out a hand, and gave a relieved gasp when it encountered nothing. Gathering the skirts of her robe, she began to pick her way across the glass-littered carpet, shards grating under her velvet slippers. Short of the door, she stopped, facing him with an obvious effort. Her eyes could not quite meet his. I will send the Aiel in to you if you wish. I could send for one of the Aes Sedai to tend your wounds. She would as soon be in a room with a Myrddraal now, or the Dark One himself, but she's no milksop. Thank you, he said quietly, but no. I would appreciate it if you told no one what happened here. Not yet. I will do what needs to be done. It had to be before commands. She gave him a kiss and hurried out, perhaps afraid he might change his mind by letting her go. As soon the Dark One himself, he murmured as the door closed behind her. Limping to the foot of the bed, he lowered himself into the chest there and laid Callandor across his knees, bloody hands resting on the glowing blade. With that in his hands, even one of the Forsaken would fear him. In a moment, he would send for Moiraine to heal his wounds. In a moment, he would speak to the Aiel outside and become the Dragon Reborn again. But for now, he only wanted to sit and remember a shepherd named Randall Thor. Chapter 3.
Alright, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.